At 3:07 on the afternoon of 21st of March, 2002, Amanda Jane Dowler, known as Millie, to her friends and family, and a friend left Heathside School in Weybridge, Surrey, England, and made their way to the railway station. The pair disembarked at Walton-on-Thames, one stop before Hersham, where they had intended to go. After stopping at the station cafe for something to eat, 13-year-old Millie phoned her father responsibly at 3:47 p.m., telling him she'd be home in half an hour. It was 4:05 when they left the cafe, and Millie started walking by herself towards her house. She was last seen 3 minutes later walking down Station Avenue, spotted by a friend of her sister who happened to be waiting at a bus stop. Further along the road, a closed-circuit television camera did not show Dowler again. This was the last sighting of the beloved schoolgirl. Amanda Jane Dowler was born in Surrey on June 25, 1988. She enjoyed music and played the saxophone. Millie was youngest daughter of Bob and Sally Dowler. She disappeared when she was just 13 years old. When Dowler failed to arrive home, authorities were notified of her absence at 7 p.m. A large-scale investigation ensued, with 100 police and helicopters scouring the vicinity around Hersham, fields, streets, and rivers included. To facilitate the search, detectives who had handled Sarah Payne's abduction case were called to assist. Sarah Payne was another high-profile missing child case that had occurred in 2000. She had lived in Hersham, Surrey, and disappeared near a cornfield of her grandfather in Kingston Gorse. Sadly, the 9-year-old was found murdered. The family launched multiple appeals for information in the media, hoping to get the word out everywhere, holding out hope Millie would be found unharmed. Sally Dowler could not think of a reason her daughter would run away, even though it was hoped she had left home of her own accord. It was reported in 2011 that Dowler had previously written a mock letter to leave her home and notes showing her dissatisfaction. Although this was deemed as childish machinations and not taken seriously, the police had determined she was most likely not taken by force about a week after Millie disappeared. No one had come forward as a witness that there was a struggle. The family contended that it was unlikely to have gone off with someone she did not know of her own free will. In April 2002, a body was found in the Thames, leading to speculation that it was the girl. However, it was later identified to be the body of a 73-year-old woman. The Sun newspaper offered a £100,000 reward for Millie's safe return. Millie's parents continued sending text messages to her mobile phone in the hope of a reply. After she had been missing for more than a month, the authorities informed the family that she had most likely passed away. In September 2002, mushroom pickers discovered human remains in Yateley Heath Woods near Yateley, Hampshire. After examination, it was determined that the remains belonged to Amanda Dowler via dental records. The decomposition was so advanced that a cause of death could not be established. None of her belongings or clothing have ever been located. As a result of this discovery, Surrey police changed the case from a missing person situation to a homicide investigation named Operation Ruby. On November 22, 2002, police set up a roadblock near where the body of Dowler was located. Despite questioning approximately 6,000 motorists in the vicinity, no information was uncovered. By initially suspecting Dowler's father, following usual procedure for such cases, Surrey police eventually apologized for any potential oversights that may have been caused by their focus on this track. Then, on March 23, 2003, DNA belonging to an unknown male was detected on an article of her clothing in her bedroom, hinting at an acquaintance with the killer. However, this lead was eliminated within 3 months, along with a connection to a church robbery in Sunderland. In 2008, Levi Belfield, a serial killer, was found guilty of murdering 2 women, Marcia McDonnell and Amelie Dellingrange. He had also attempted to murder Kate Sheedy by ramming her with his car. His conviction soon raised suspicion of him in the Millie Dowler case, as CCTV cameras had caught a red Daewoo Nexia in the area at the time of her disappearance. According to records, Belfield's then-partner lived nearby and owned a car of that same make and color. The same camera that had caught the last moments of Millie walking innocently home was able to capture a Daewoo Nexia belonging to Levi Belfield's girlfriend, Emma Mills, at 4:32 p.m. In an interview with the Daily Mirror newspaper from prison in 2009, Belfield suggested it was likely he had been behind the wheel of the red Daewoo seen in Walton-on-Thames. However, he was cautious in how he answered questions. "I did use the Daewoo once, and I was stopped by the police for speeding." Despite not finding the car itself, Belfield was eventually charged with Millie's murder in March 2010. The trial of Belfield at the Central Criminal Court, chaired by Mr. Justice Wilkie, ended on June 23, 2011, after the jury found him guilty. The next day, he was sentenced to life imprisonment, and, due to his previous murder convictions 3 years before, the trial judge recommended life sentence without the possibility of parole. Another charge of attempted abduction of Rachel Cowles, an 11-year-old girl who had been offered a lift in Walton area by someone in a red car on March 20, 2002, was dropped as newspapers published prejudicial material. Nevertheless, the judge ordered that the accusation should remain on record. As of June 23, 2011, Levi Belfield, who had already been sentenced to life for the murders of Marcia McDonnell and Amelie Delagrange, as well as the attempted murder of Kate Shitty, was also found guilty of abducting and murdering Millie Dowler and was sentenced to an additional life sentence. According to Surrey police, Belfield admitted to abducting, abusing, and killing Dowler on January 27, 2016. Following their daughter's death, Dowler's parents established a charity called Millie's Fund to promote public safety, in particular, the safety of children and young people. A Minnesota man has been charged with murdering and dismembering his girlfriend and leaving behind a mountain of evidence, including a Google search for the word jugular, the day she disappeared. And in a grim twist, police have learned that another woman tied to the suspect has been missing for 2 years. To put it bluntly, we're concerned for her safety also, St. Paul Police Sergeant Mike Ernster said at a press conference. Joseph Jorgensen, 40, barricaded himself in his Maplewood bedroom and started a fire when police, following the trail of clues left behind, showed up at his apartment to search it in June 2023. He allegedly tried to grab a SWAT officer's AR-15, but was arrested. 2 days later, police discovered the chopped-up remains of Manijeh Starren in coolers at a storage facility, where a unit had been rented under the name of Jorgensen's roommate. "Thank you to the officers for following every lead," Starren's brother wrote on Facebook after her body was found. "My beautiful sister, you will be missed greatly. Heaven has gotten a new angel, and we haven't stopped looking and found you to bring you home. Hope you are sitting with Grandpa fishing and watching dolphins up there fly high. I love you." According to her family, the mother of 3 struggled with addiction and was supposed to enter treatment in April, but never made it there. The last time anyone had contact with her was April 21st, when she spoke by phone with the father of one of her children. Her own father reported her missing on May 1st, and soon after, police learned that she was allegedly the victim of domestic violence. Her son's father relayed to investigators that she said Jorgensen had once wrapped a rope around her neck, and a neighbor reported seeing her with a black eye and red marks on her neck. The neighbor asked Starren if she wanted to call police, but the 33-year-old told her, "It will just make things worse." Investigators began collecting evidence that pointed to a grim outcome, starting with security video that showed Starren running from her apartment on April 21st and Jorgensen pulling her back in. Police said she was never seen on video again, but Jorgensen was caught on camera coming in and out of the apartment 28 times in the following week, and once he was seen carrying a suitcase and duffel bags into his roommate's pickup truck. Inside Starren's apartment, police found a scene of chaos, a cracked TV and microwave. the sheet pulled off the bed with a large piece of a foam pad cut out, and blood on the couch in the living room, and in the kitchen that would later be revealed as the victims. The manager of the building where Jorgensen lived told police that residents had complained around May 15th or 16th of a stench from his apartment that smelled like something had died. Shortly afterwards, the manager and maintenance employee saw Jorgensen carrying and dragging large black duffel bags out of the apartment. They commented to each other that it looked like Jorgensen was carrying a dead body. Police would later find blood in a closet in the apartment, along with recent maggot activity, according to reports. They also found 2 padlock keys that matched the storage unit, where cell phone records show that Jorgensen had been on May 18th. In addition to the physical evidence, investigators found Jorgensen had repeatedly used Starren's food stamps card, had purchased a large amount of cleaning supplies, and had made some unusual Google searches. On April 21st, he searched for jugular. On May 1st, he searched, "What do police do with a missing persons report?" On May 3rd, he Googled, "How to clear cookies from Android phone." On May 27th, he looked up, "How to remove GPS lime scooter." On June 4th, Jorgensen Googled, "Lime for soil." The complaint noted that lime can be used to speed up the decomposition process of a body and to reduce the smell of decomposition. Detectives said they also found 2 threatening messages Jorgensen sent to Starren 2 weeks before she vanished. "And you owe me 2 because you called the cops on me 2 times. Very clear I was of that being punishable by hanging. I'm giving you this plea bargain opportunity. So you welcome," one read. The other said, "Hope you die of a kidney infection." In the course of investigating the killing of Starren, police learned that another missing woman, Fanta Exayavong, 33, was last seen with Jorgensen before she disappeared in July 2021. Jorgensen remains in the Ramsey County Jail. A Connecticut mother of 3 was killed with an axe by her ex-boyfriend in an attack that authorities say was witnessed by her teenage son. Ewan DeWitt, 42, of Roxbury, has been charged with murder, risk of injury, and reckless endangerment in connection the death of 40-year-old Julie Minogue, according to the Milford Police Department. DeWitt is also charged with violation of a protection order and restraining order, the latter of which was granted just 5 days before the killing, authorities said. Police said the 911 call they received on December 6th was made by the victim's 17-year-old son, who reported his mother was being assaulted by a man inside their home. He was woken up by screams and went downstairs, where he thought he heard DeWitt yelling, "You didn't believe me," reports stated. The teen claimed DeWitt was holding an axe and his mother was on the floor, covered in blood. The teen then ran upstairs, dialed 911, and jumped out of his bedroom window, where he was met by police. Responding officers found Minogue's body on the kitchen floor surrounded by blood. They also discovered a large axe on the stove. Police said the victim's 3-year-old son was also inside the home during the alleged slaying, but was unharmed. Both children are in the care of family members. Though DeWitt fled the scene before law enforcement arrived, a suspect matching his description was captured on Ring camera footage, which shows a man walking with an axe near the scene of the attack. DeWitt was eventually arrested in West Haven, but not before his mother informed police that she had received a call from him in which he claimed to have killed his girlfriend, according to court documents. According to an affidavit, Minogue claimed she feared DeWitt would kill her, and that's exactly what authorities allege happened that day. "I don't feel I should be subjected to this abuse any longer," she allegedly wrote in the restraining order she was granted on December 1st. According to police, he had sent several harassing text messages to Minogue in the days leading up to the filing. However, this is not DeWitt's first encounter with law enforcement. He was previously arrested by Milford Police in November 2019 for assaulting Minogue, and a protective order was issued at the time. Julie Minogue's sister, Allison Corcoran, said on a GoFundMe that the single mother was a victim of domestic violence and had tried multiple times to keep her and her children safe. Now, Nicholas, Sean, and 3-year-old Luke are left without a mother, someone who cared for them with ease and love. The fundraiser's description reads, Corcoran hopes that by raising $100,000, her nephews will have enough financial support to be able to thrive in their careers and continue their education. DeWitt was arraigned at the Connecticut Superior Court in Milford on December 7th and is being held on a $5 million bond. It's not immediately clear if the suspect has entered a plea or retained an attorney to comment on his behalf. The Milford police then took a DNA sample from DeWitt after DeWitt appeared in Milford Superior Court for a motion from Milford State's Attorney Margaret Kelly requesting DeWitt's DNA. The prosecution wants to see if it matches DNA found on the weapon used to kill Julie Minogue, the mother of DeWitt's 3-year-old son. Julie Minogue said in court testimony before she died, "He says clearly that he wants his mission in life is to ruin my life. It would be the third and final time in less than a month that Julie Minogue would plead to authorities, including police and 2 judges, that her life was in danger. That's saying that he wants to ruin my life, so he wants to basically kill me," Julie said in court testimony. 3 weeks after Julie went to police for more protection, she was murdered. Milford police admit her request wasn't processed. Minogue had brought her concerns to police just 3 weeks before her murder. The officer who handled her report submitted an arrest warrant for DeWitt to the state's attorney's office, but it was sent back seeking more information about the texts and then never resubmitted. DeWitt wasn't charged with harassment and violation of a protective order until after Minogue's murder. The officer who handled Minogue's initial report was put on leave pending the outcome of an internal investigation into what went wrong. According to authorities, the officer assigned to the case, Scott Nablin, prepared an arrest warrant for DeWitt, but it was returned by a prosecutor seeking additional, unspecified information and not submitted again prior to Minogue's death. After the homicide, Nablin was put on leave pending an internal investigation. Officer Scott Nablin, who was placed on leave, resigned in July following an investigation in connection with his inaction leading up to the death of Julie Minogue in December 2022. Minogue's family previously announced they intend to file a lawsuit against the city and the police department for not preventing her death. On July 6, 1973, Linda Ann O'Keefe, 11, woke up for summer school at her home in Newport Beach, California. She put on the dress her mother had made for her. It was a pretty dress with light blue flowers and dark blue trim. She then put a ponytail in her hair, put on her white ankle socks and dark blue shoes, and headed out the door. Her piano teacher would be picking her up that day. Linda was a shy little girl and a Girl Scout who loved painting, crafts, and piano. Her mother said she loved to express herself through drawing and was incredibly talented. She loved laying out in the sun and going to the beach, a true California girl. Linda would often watch TV and kept her room extremely clean, even asking her mother to assess her room after she was done cleaning. She was a sensitive child who had just lost her cat. When her pet died, her mother said it was hard to console her. She took it very hard. Linda had 2 sisters, and she was remarkably close to her eldest sister, an adult, and worked in a dry cleaning shop while living at their parents' home. Linda was also a member of the local youth center, and normally she rode her bicycle to Lincoln Elementary School in Corona del Mar. On that day, however, her piano teacher was giving her a ride to school, so later she walked the short distance home from school. Linda was last seen alive walking home from summer school. A day later, a man searching for frogs in the Back Bay area found her body in a ditch. She had been brutally raped and murdered by strangulation. On the 45th anniversary of Linda O'Keefe's murder, the Newport Beach Police Department created the Twitter thread, Linda Story. The series of 68 tweets, told through Linda's point of view, drew readers in with details about her life as well as foreboding moments of her last day. Linda O'Keefe's case went cold long ago. Needing a way to bring her story back into the public, Newport Beach Police Sergeant Court Depweg consulted with Jen Manzella, then the spokeswoman for the department, on how to do just that. Right away, Manzella suggested Twitter. It was so important for me to give a little girl whose life was cut short at 11 years old the opportunity to speak again, she said. Linda is going to help us find this man who did this to her. Linda, pictured front row left, was the middle child in her family of 5. Her dad, Richard, was a machinist and they shared a special bond. Her mom, Barbara, was an artist and working seamstress. Linda's older sister, Cindy, says their mom sewed most of their clothes. According to Linda's sister, Cindy Borgeson, Linda was a very gentle, lovely soul who loved Billie Holiday and Nancy Drew. Linda was a Girl Scout and nature lover. Cindy says their family would vacation in the redwoods and Linda would crouch down and little newts and snakes would come right up to her. She says, Linda saw the beauty in the world and always seemed to see the good in people. Linda usually ride her bike to school, but on this day, she got a ride from her piano teacher. Without her bike and not wanting to walk home, Linda, pictured right, called her mom at the end of school from the school office and begged her for a ride home. Cindy overheard her mom's end of the call telling Linda she was too busy with work to pick her up and to walk home. Linda, upset and crying, eventually left the school office. She sat on the curb in front of the school for a little bit before beginning her walk. Around 1:15 p.m. that day, less than an hour after Linda called for a ride, a young woman named Janine, who goes by Jondi, pictured left, and her mother spotted Linda talking to a white man in a turquoise van near the intersection of Marguerite and Inlet Drive. The women lived a few houses down from Linda's family and thought the scene was odd, but didn't think it was dangerous. It was the last time anyone saw Linda alive. As dinner time approached and Linda still hadn't returned home, her mother started to get worried. After calling friends and driving around the neighborhood, Linda's mom called police. An intensive search for Linda began. The search for Linda lasted through the night and into the next morning. On the morning of July 7, 1973, a local architect named Ron Yeo was biking along a nature trail known as the Back Bay with his young son. When Ron went to show his son a spot to find frogs, he instead made a gruesome discovery. He found Linda O'Keefe's body. Linda was still wearing the dress her mom made for her and carrying a homemade book bag. The Orange County Coroner's Office found that Linda had been sexually assaulted and strangled, and her death was ruled a homicide. But detectives couldn't figure out who killed her. The sleepy beach town of Corona del Mar was shaken after Linda's murder. While police were trying to find her killer, Linda's classmates wanted to find him too. Our 11-year-old selves, we all got on our bikes, and we all wanted to help, said Terry Briscoe Corwin. They searched for the van all around town, but just like police, they didn't find anything. Decades later, investigators got a break. A forward-thinking criminalist at the time of Linda's murder had collected swabs of the killer's semen from Linda's body and preserved it. As technology advanced, a DNA profile of an unidentified suspect was generated. In October 2017, Newport Beach Sergeant Depweg hired a company called Parabon Nanolabs to take the suspect's DNA and generate a snapshot, a composite based on the suspect's genetic characteristics. Newport Beach police ended their Twitter thread, Linda Story, with the new composite, revealing it to the public for the first time. They asked a question that has haunted investigators for decades. If science could give the assailant a face, could it give him a name? Linda's classmates never forgot about what happened. When Linda's story was published, they waited anxiously to see if anything would come of it. Terry Briscoe Corwin says, "We were all together on pins and needles waiting to see Who is this guy? Linda's story didn't directly lead investigators to Linda's killer, but Sergeant Diepweg says it paid off big time. On February 19, 2019, more than 45 years after her sister was murdered, Cindy Borgeson received a call from Sergeant Diepweg telling her that they had arrested her sister's killer. I was so excited. I wish my parents were here to hear this news. Detectives also submitted the DNA recovered from Linda's body to a genealogical website. They received a clue that James Allen Neal, 73, was a viable suspect in Linda's murder. He was found living in Monument, Colorado, and arrested in February 2019, then extradited to Orange County, California. Neal pleaded not guilty to Linda's murder and to allegations of lewd and lascivious acts on two other girls under age 14 between 1995 and 2004. Finally, the O'Keefe family would see justice, but that sense of potential closure would be short-lived. Neal was taken to an area hospital on May 25, 2020, due to an undisclosed illness, and died a few days later. The Orange County Sheriff said he did not appear to have COVID-19 symptoms. Even though Linda's killer never stood trial, the technology and investigative techniques used by Newport Police Department to identify and apprehend Neal were innovative and effective. Hopefully, such emerging investigative tools give new hope to other families of murder victims. I never really thought that they would actually ever find the individual responsible, Linda's older sister Cindy Borgeson stated. After all this time, finding out there is a face and a name just brings additional closure. Despite the closure Borgeson described, their mother carried the guilt of not going to pick her daughter up for the rest of her life. Linda's mother, Barbara, passed away in 2005. In 2008, her father, Richard, passed, never feeling that sense of closure or peace. For the investigators, their work was not in vain. It is their hope that the O'Keefe family no longer feels haunted by not knowing the fate of their beloved daughter. On the night of January 6, 2007, Shannon Christian, 21, and her boyfriend Christopher Newsom, 23, headed out for a friend's birthday party in Knoxville, Tennessee. They never arrived. En route to the festivities, they were carjacked, tortured, raped, and killed in acts of unthinkable violence. Dina Christian, Shannon's mother, awoke with a bad feeling on January 7th. Shannon, a sociology major at the University of Tennessee, wasn't home or answering phone calls. The worry intensified when Shannon's best friend called and said that the two were no-shows at the party. Then Shannon's boss phoned to say she never came to work. Dana dialed 911. Because Shannon and Chris were adults, authorities couldn't step in until after 24 hours had passed. In the meantime, Shannon's cell phone pinged near Cherry Street, a high-crime neighborhood in the city. It's not an area you go to unless you live there or unless you're up to no good, Knoxville News-Sentinel reporter Jamie Satterfield stated. The Christians and Newsoms went searching for their kids on their own, and Shannon's father found her car. Ed Kingsbury, an investigator with the Knoxville Police Department, stated that the vehicle had been wiped down and the scrubbing was an ominous red flag. The situation went from bad to worse. On January 8th, a man's burned body, still smoking in the aftermath of being set ablaze, was found near train tracks. Authorities confirmed that it was Chris Newsom. He had been bound and shot 3 times and set on fire. To locate Shannon, police examined her car and found an envelope. It was dusted for prints and yielded a hit. Tim Hutchison, a retired Knox County sheriff, stated, "The suspect, Lamarcus Davidson, was a known carjacker who'd recently gotten out of prison. Investigators learned that he was renting a small house on Chipman Street in the Cherry Street area. On January 9th, investigators searched the house and found Shannon's lifeless body. She had been gang-raped, choked, and bound before being put in a garbage can and suffocated to death. "They stuffed her in a trash can like a piece of trash," Dina Christian stated. A search of the murder scene turned up a video rented from a library in Kentucky by a man named George Thomas. As the investigation crossed state lines and federal investigators were called in, Knoxville police questioned Davidson's girlfriend, Daphne Sutton, who'd lived in the Chipman Street house right up until Channon and Chris went missing. Sutton told authorities that on January 7th, Davidson was at the house with Thomas, Davidson's half-brother Latalvis Cobbins, and a woman named Vanessa Coleman. Sutton said she'd last seen Davidson when she dropped him off later that day at the home of a person named Eric Boyd. Knoxville police tracked down Boyd, who led them to a house where Davidson was holed up. As the SWAT team grabbed Davidson, the suspect declared that he'd done nothing to that girl. Meanwhile, about 133 miles away in Lebanon, Kentucky, Cobbins, Coleman, and Thomas were arrested. Authorities counted on the alleged co-conspirators to rat each other out, and Thomas revealed that Davidson was the ringleader of the murders and named Boyd as his accomplice. Authorities had 5 suspects in custody and mounting DNA material incriminating suspects in varying ways to Shannon's killing, despite the fact household clean had been poured in her mouth to remove evidence, according to court records. On the other hand, DNA evidence on Chris was destroyed when his body was set ablaze. Aware that there was evidence, the 5 suspects told their version of the events to cast blame on others. A picture of the fatal events emerged. Davidson needed a vehicle, and Channon and Christopher were targeted for carjacking. When the two were ambushed at gunpoint, another car approached and spooked the suspects. The couple was pushed into the vehicle and taken to the Chipman Street house. A key element of the case turned on Tennessee's criminal responsibility law. If you're aware of a crime and do nothing to stop it, you're held responsible too. Except for Boyd, suspects implicated themselves by admitting that they were in the house. Among the questions that emerged was whether Coleman was a willing participant in the crime or held against her will. In a journal, Coleman described events around January 7th as fun adventures. It cast doubts on her claims of innocence. Trials unfolded separately. In April 2008, Boyd was found guilty of being an accessory to a fatal carjacking and of aiding Davidson, a fugitive. He was sentenced to the maximum of 18 years. The Knox County DA built sturdy cases against Davidson, Cobbins, and Thomas. Over 8 months, each was tried independently on 46 charges, including the kidnap, rape, and murder of Channon and Chris. This was the worst crime Knoxville had experienced, Hugh Newsom stated. Photographs of the crimes caused some people in court to pass out. The judge, former Knox County Criminal Court, Judge Richard Baumgartner, declared that anyone who cried would be kicked out of court. "You will not be allowed to be in this courtroom if you do that because I will not tolerate it," Baumgartner said in taped proceedings. The verdicts were delivered in 3 independent trials before 3 separate 12-member juries. Davidson was found guilty of 2 premeditated murders and received the death penalty. Thomas and Cobbins each got life sentences without the possibility of parole. Coleman was found guilty of lesser charges and was sentenced to 53 years. But a shocking twist that threw judgments into question came 4 years after the murders. In January 2011, Baumgartner announced that he was stepping down and admitted that he was hooked on opiates. The disgraced judge resigned and eventually pleaded to misconduct before he died at age 70 in 2018. The state Supreme Court ruled that because there was DNA evidence in the Davidson and Cobbins convictions, the sentences would stand, but new trials for Thomas and Coleman were ordered. In November 2012, Coleman was found guilty of facilitating a deadly carjack and kidnap. Her sentence was reduced from 53 years to 35 years. 6 months later, Thomas's sentence was reduced to life with the possibility of parole after 51 years. Relieved that perpetrators didn't get away scot-free, the Newsoms were still determined that Boyd would pay for their son's death. "We took it upon ourselves to go and talk to George Thomas," Hugh Newsom stated. Prosecutors struck a deal with him if Thomas testified against Boyd. 11 years after the murders, Thomas threw everything on Boyd, Satterfield stated. On August 13, 2018, Boyd was found guilty of 36 charges connected to the kidnap, rape, and murder of Channon and Chris. He received 2 life sentences plus 90 years in prison. Davidson and Boyd have unsuccessfully appealed their sentences. The Christians and the Newsoms are present for every appeal. Seeking justice for their kids never ends. Janet Levine March had a seemingly perfect life at the time she disappeared in August 1996. Married to a successful lawyer, this mother of 2 had a flourishing art career and lived in a dream home she had designed and built. Arthur March and his son Perry are 2 Americans who have escaped to the central Mexican town of Ajayac. Years ago, Arthur March became one of hundreds of American retirees who settled in the little lakeside town. But his son Perry was a successful Nashville attorney in the prime of his career. Why did he come down to Ajayac? I brought Perry down here because he didn't have any other place to go, says Arthur March. On a summer night in 1996, Perry March's wife, Janet Levine March, mysteriously disappeared without a trace. And ever since, Perry March says he has become a target too, pursued by people he says are determined to destroy him. About a month and a half ago, there was an effort afoot to either have me killed or have me arrested, to plant something like cocaine in my car, says Perry. And, he says, these same people are trying to kidnap his 2 children, Sammy and Zeepy. Janet's disappearance still mystifies her family and close friends. Her father, Larry Levine, says Janet's plans included kids, marriage, a family, a home, an art career, her mother Carolyn adds. The Levines had proudly watched their daughter fulfill those plans, one by one. Janet returned to Nashville with her college boyfriend, Perry March, in 1985. They married in 1987 and lived in a house just a few miles from her parents. I cared about him a lot, an awful lot, Carolyn Levine now says about Perry. She became almost a surrogate mother to Perry. His own mother had died in an accident when he was only 9 years old. Janet loved him, and as long as she did. Then we wanted to do everything we could to help him, Larry Levine recalls. And Janet's parents did help him. Larry Levine paid Perry's way through Vanderbilt Law School in Nashville. Then Perry began practicing law and ended up working in his father-in-law's firm. He treated me as a confidant and as a son, says Perry. Meanwhile, Janet pursued her art. She had done some really fine work, sold some paintings, and had been hired to do some commercial illustrations, says Perry. 3 years after they married, Sammy was born. Then, 4 years later, Janet gave birth to their daughter Zipporah, known as Zeepy. And in 1995, Perry says Janet fulfilled yet another of her dreams, building a spectacular home she had designed. This was her dream home, he says. On the surface, Janet had it all, a dream house. 2 beautiful children, an art career, and a successful husband. But something must have gone terribly wrong, because around 8 p.m. on August 15th, 1996, Perry March says she just walked out. On that warm summer night, Perry says his wife packed some bags, walked out the door, and drove off. March says Janet never told him where she was going, and says when he asked her, she said, "None of your business. I'll see you in a couple days. See how it is with the kids." Since that night, no one has ever reported seeing Janet March again. Perry March says the evening started with a relatively normal family dinner. It was after he put their 2 children to bed, Perry says, that he and Janet began to argue. You know, it's the kind of argument that you have when you're both tired of the arguments. She had made a decision that she was going to take a vacation, he recalls. His wife was going away, Perry says, for 12 days and was to come back just in time for their son Sammy's 6th birthday on August 27th. Change the light bulbs, balance my checkbook, clean the basement, just a various list of things that I had seemed to have dropped the ball on in the course of my 10 years with her, he remembers. And she made me sign her list, that I would have these things done when she got back. And she said, "See ya," and the door turned and she started her Volvo, and she drove off. No one else, not even Janet's parents, knew she was going away. Carolyn Levine says, Perry called at midnight on August 15th to tell them Janet had left. I said, Perry, don't worry about it. I'm sure if you had an argument she's upset. She's probably driving around to cool off. She'll be back. Call me when she comes home, Levine remembers. But Janet didn't come back in the morning, and Carolyn Levine says she began to worry about her daughter. Perry says he thought his wife might be luxuriating at a hotel, and that her disappearance was a stunt to make him understand what life as a young mother was like. Perry says he became worried after the 3rd or 4th day, because I knew what she had taken with her, and I knew it wasn't the amount of things that she needed for an extended period of time. When Janet didn't call home, her husband and her parents started looking for her. They called her friends. They went to the airport parking lot and looked for her car in the parking lot. They called hotels in Nashville and out of state. What they didn't do, oddly enough, is call the police. Perry says he didn't call police because he says the Levines forbade him to call the authorities. They were very concerned that if we reported something to the authorities, it would end up embarrassing Janet, and that would make my situation with her worse, he says. But the Levines say it was Perry who didn't want to call the police. Perry insisted he didn't want to go to the police. He wanted to see a private investigator, says Larry Levine. Perry calls that an outright lie. You can believe Janet's husband or not, but the fact is that the family waited a full 2 weeks before Perry and his father-in-law walked into a police station in Nashville and reported that Janet was missing. Why did it take 2 weeks? Well, that's my mistake. That's my mistake. Because I was living with these people, I loved these people, Perry says. And Larry Levine also says they made a mistake. But Perry kept telling us, maybe she went here. Maybe she went there. He told us a story. And unfortunately, I believed him, Carolyn Levine adds. At first, this was just another missing person case to Nashville detective Mickey Miller. The first thing we did is start checking credit card accounts and things of that nature, says Miller. But Janet had not left a paper trail. Already worried, Janet's friends knew something was very wrong when Janet wasn't there for Sammy's 6th birthday party. Then, just a week into their investigation, police found Janet's car parked in the lot of an apartment complex, just a few miles from the March house. We found a lot of her personal items, including her passport, says Detective Miller. 3 weeks after Janet disappeared, with no credit card use, no phone calls home to check on the kids, and her car found with most of her belongings still packed inside, police decided this was no longer just a missing person case. It was a homicide. The Levine family and their friends posted a $25,000 reward for information, leading to the location of Mrs. March or her body, police announced. And the prime suspect in the case was Perry March. Perry refused police requests to interview him or his children. When he also refused to allow his house to be searched, police got a warrant. 1 month after the disappearance, police went inch by inch through the house. We vacuumed all the floors. We collected the vacuum bags out of the vacuums that belonged here. We even processed these hardwood floors for fingerprints and palm prints, recalls Nashville crime scene investigator Johnny Hunter. Investigators searched nearby woods, 2 lakes and a river, yet found no trace of Janet and no evidence that a crime had even been committed. They couldn't find some other reason to explain Janet's being missing. They couldn't find anything. And therefore it must be me, says Perry. But there was one thing about the search that really bothered police, and still does. Not what they found, but what they didn't find. Perry had told police that a list Janet had given him the night she left had been created on their home computer. That list was practically the only piece of evidence that backed up his story. But police didn't believe him. In fact, they wanted to get their hands on the computer's hard drive because they believed it might show that Perry, not Janet, had written the list. The problem was that the hard drive was missing. Perry says he did not remove the hard drive. Asked who he thinks removed it, Perry says, "Well, there's two people that are high on my list who could have removed it. One of them is Larry Levine, and the other is my father." Perry's father, Arthur March, had come to stay at Perry's house several days after Janet disappeared. But he says he doesn't even know what a hard drive is. And Larry Levine also said he did not remove the hard drive. "I had nothing to gain by trying to get at it," he says. Meanwhile, police became concerned about something else they didn't find: the tires on Perry's car. 6 days after Janet disappeared, Perry replaced the tires with new ones. "It was on my list. The tires on the Jeep were bald. And she was worried the Jeep was going to be slipping in the rain and all this other kind of stuff, and I was just knocking off the stuff on my list," says Perry. But according to Detective Miller, the tire company says that the tires did not need to be changed. In fact, they questioned that, why the tires were being changed, and Perry said he just didn't like the type tires that were on the car at the time, and he wanted a different brand. Yet even as investigators became convinced that he was involved in his wife's disappearance, they couldn't come up with the evidence to charge Perry March with a crime. When their daughter first disappeared, the Levines struggled to make sense of their son-in-law's account that, after an argument, she packed her bags and left on a 12-day vacation. One thing that troubled Carolyn was the appointment her daughter had talked about the day she disappeared. "She asked me to go with her the next day to see a divorce lawyer," says Carolyn. When Perry was named as a suspect and stopped cooperating with police, the Levines' suspicions grew. Larry Levine says he is 100% certain Perry killed Janet. "Unconditionally positive," he says. The Levines made their first move the day Perry was named as a suspect. They filed a court action to stop him from taking Sammy and Zeepy out of town. But that very day, Perry moved with his children to Chicago. The Levines then went to a Chicago court to file for visitation rights with their grandchildren. After a 2-year legal battle, a Chicago court granted the Levines weekend visitation rights. But when they showed up in a courtroom in the spring of 1999 to finalize the agreement, Perry wasn't there. He had moved to Mexico. "I moved to Mexico because I needed to get the hell out of Dodge and start a new life, and get out of their clutches," says Perry. Perry and his 2 children settled into a new life in Ahihec, the Mexican town his father Arthur had retired to years earlier. Arthur March helped his son get started on a new career as a financial and real estate advisor. Perry and his children moved into a house, along with Carmen Rojas, who he met during his first week in Mexico, and her 3 children. They married within a year. His old life in Nashville was a chapter Perry was now more than ready to close. As for what happened to his first wife, Janet, Carmen Rojas says she doesn't know what happened or why she went away. "I've told the children the truth, that Mommy left home. We don't know what happened to her. It's very sad. But that's the truth," says Perry. The truth for the Levines was also very sad, but totally different. 2 months after Perry fled with their grandchildren to Mexico, Janet's parents filed a wrongful death claim against their former son-in-law in a Nashville civil court. When Perry failed to show up in court to fight the charge, Judge Frank Clement ruled against him and found him wrongfully responsible for causing her death. For the Levines, it was a vindication. But Perry says he thinks it's a crock. "I think it's unconstitutional," he says. After a year in Mexico, there was no question for Sammy March, then age 9, and his sister Zeepy, 6 at the time, that this was their home with their dad, Perry, and their new mom, Carmen. But 1,500 miles away, the Levines desperately wanted to see their grandchildren. Since the Levines' action against him for the wrongful death of their daughter, Perry had refused to let them have contact with the children. So in May 2000, the Levines showed up at their son-in-law's front door, armed with legal papers from the United States, granting them visitation and demanding to see their grandchildren. Perry refused to let the Levines visit Sammy and Zippy, and the grandparents went back to Nashville. But then, a month later, came a day Perry says he'll never forget. It was just after 9 a.m., and Sammy and Zippy were just starting their school day. Perry was in his office. 4 Mexicans walk in. One of them with a badge and a uniform says he's from immigration, and I'm to come with him immediately, he recalls. They grabbed me under the arms and put me in a headlock, lifted me by my ears, lifted me off my feet and shoved me through my conference room doors. And all I get is your paperwork is not in order. You're coming with us. I get down the stairs and there's an unmarked old white van in the parking lot. The door opens and they throw me in. These guys grab me in the car, hold me down, and the van takes off. At that very moment, a convoy of cars was approaching the entrance to Sammy and Zippy's school. Inside the cars were a local lawyer, a Mexican judge, several Mexican policemen, and the Levines. This time, the Levines got Mexican authorities to help them execute their court-ordered visitation, and Perry was in no position to try and stop them. What did he think was going on? I think my kids are being grabbed. Which is exactly what was occurring, says Perry. But word of what was happening at the school immediately got to Arthur March. This was the second time they came to kidnap my grandchildren, he says. Arthur March raced to the school and says he told Larry Levine to get out of there and leave my kids alone. Larry Levine claims Arthur March threatened him, allegedly telling him that neither he or his wife would get out of Mexico alive. Asked if he ever pulled a gun on the Levines or anyone working for them, Arthur March responds with shrugs and a smile. Back in the speeding van, Perry realized his armed captors were taking him to the airport. He decided to take a gamble. He dropped the name of the immigration official he suspected his captors were working for. The chief of the van got out and got on a cell phone. 3 minutes of conversation. He gets back into the van, turns around to me, and says, "It's a terrible mistake. I'm sorry. Your paperwork is in order," Perry recalls. When he was finally released, Perry sped off toward the school. "I was so angry I probably could have killed someone at that time," he says. He was too late. After a chaotic hour of arguments and threats, school administrators handed Sammy and Zippy over to the Mexican judge, who in turn handed them over to the Levines. When they brought the kids down and they saw us, they just came running. I just kind of knelt down, and we hugged them, and they were happy to see us. And we were overjoyed to see them, remembers Carolyn Levine. By the time Perry reached the school, the Levines and his children were gone. But just behind the Levines, in hot pursuit, was Arthur March. "Maybe I wasn't thinking rationally, but those are my grandkids," he says. "We were very scared. We were very scared of this man," says Carolyn Levine. "I believed that he would try and kill us." "Absolutely," Larry Levine adds. Eventually, the Levines lost Arthur March and headed for an airport. Within 24 hours, Sammy and Zippy were back in Nashville. "They are kidnappers. It was all a big orchestration," says Perry. But Larry Levine denies they are kidnappers. Absolutely not. How did the Levines choose that day to pick up their grandchildren? They had gotten a warning from the FBI that Mexican immigration officials planned to question, and maybe even deport Perry that morning. This would be a good time, they were told, to try once again to enforce their court order for visitation. "This was a court order in which we were doing what the court said we had a right to do," says Larry Levine. While the court order said they had to return the children to their father in 39 days, The Levines were now taking steps to get permanent custody of Sammy and Zippy. They enrolled the children in a Nashville school. Back in Mexico, Perry was afraid he was going to lose his children for good. But then everything changed. Two heroes showed up in my life, lawyers by the name of Bob Katz and John Herbison, who had been following my case and volunteered to get my children back for me, says March. His American attorneys found a law that changed everything, not a Tennessee law, not even a United States law, but an international treaty. The bottom line is that this treaty says that you can't steal children and try to make custody determinations in the jurisdiction where you stole them to, says Perry. His lawyers took the case to a U.S. federal court and won. The Levines were told to send the children back with all due speed. Perry says his kids' return was a celebration. The first thing they did is they hugged me and said, "Daddy, why did it take so long to get us home?" By the summer of 2005, Perry and his new family had settled into life in Mexico. Sammy and Zippy were stars in their school, and Perry and Carmen opened a cafe. But 9 years after Janet's disappearance, police were about to make a stunning arrest. On the morning of August 3, 2003, Perry arrived at his restaurant around 8 a.m. His perfect world was about to collapse. Mexican immigration authorities grabbed Perry, saying his visa had been revoked. They were deporting him back to the United States immediately. Perry wasn't allowed to go pack a bag or kiss his wife and children goodbye, and was driven directly to the Guadalajara airport and put on a plane. The investigation into the murder of Janet March became the mission of Nashville's cold case detectives, Sergeant Pat Postiglione and Bill Pridemore, in 2002. 2.5 years later, they took their evidence to a grand jury. The grand jury proceedings were conducted entirely in secret in December 2004, and 59 witnesses testified. In the end, and without his knowledge, Perry was indicted for the murder of his wife. After the indictment, the FBI and Nashville cops worked with Mexican immigration officials to get Perry out of Mexico and back on U.S. soil, where he could be arrested. Perry's plane landed in Los Angeles, the first time he had entered the United States since fleeing to Mexico years ago. Once in L.A., he was arrested for Janet's murder and handed over to detectives Postiglione and Pridemore, who took him back to Nashville. For the Levines, the news of Perry's return to Nashville was bittersweet. Almost immediately, they started working to get the children back, going to court to seek custody. It took weeks and a number of court appearances, but eventually the Levines won custody. Perry, in the meantime, had gathered a team of lawyers and was fighting the criminal charges against him in preliminary hearings. In addition to second-degree murder, Perry had been indicted for tampering with evidence and, despite the fact that Janet's body had never been found, the macabre charge of abuse of a corpse. Perry's lawyer pleaded not guilty on his behalf. Prosecutors are tight-lipped about any evidence they plan to present at the trial, but acknowledge much of the case is circumstantial, including the new tires Perry put on the family car after Janet disappeared, the missing hard drive from his home computer, and the discrepancies with Perry's original story of Janet's departure. Detective Miller, though no longer working the case, will be a key witness. Perry said that when Janet left, that she had written out a message, allegedly that she was going to go on an extended 12-day vacation, says Miller. The problem, says Miller, is that her son's birthday party was coming up. I think if you look at the date that she disappeared, on the 15th, and you add that 12 days to it, that would have her coming back on the 27th. And that would make sense because Sammy's birthday was on the 27th, he says. What somebody didn't think about was that Janet had already sent out invitations for his party for the 25th, 2 days before that. The grand jury also heard from a friend of Janet's, who spoke to her the very evening she disappeared. She had called to arrange a playdate with Sammy and her son for the next day. On the morning of August 16th, Sammy's friend and his mother showed up at the March house. The women rang the doorbell, knocked on the door, got no answer, and let themselves in. The woman walked down a hallway towards the kitchen, calling out to see if anyone was at home. When she got to a room, she says she heard Perry March's voice coming from behind that door. She says he asked who it was. She told him, and he sent her on her way. But she did not leave before noticing something in the room that she later described as strange. There was a new oriental rug, fairly large rug. It was rolled up, basically blocking the doorway where you go into Perry's study and Janet's art studio, says Detective Miller. Investigators have not found this rug, and Miller says Perry has denied its existence. The police theory is that after killing Janet, Perry put her body inside that rug and then buried it. That's a complete farce. I know the house I lived in, and I know there was no oriental rug in our house other than one runner this wide. If she had been wrapped in that rug, she would have looked like a hot dog wrapped, like one of those little sausages wrapped that you see on an appetizer tray, he said. The rug issue came up again in a recent bond hearing. Radina Friedman, who was Sammy March's court-appointed guardian during the early custody battles between Perry March and the Levines, said Sammy remembers the night his mother left. The night his mother disappeared, he heard his parents fighting. He did not see them. He heard them fighting. And then he fell asleep. When he woke up the following morning, his mother was gone. He saw a rug that was rolled up somewhere in the vicinity of the kitchen, and when he returned later that day, the rug was gone, says Friedman. And there is yet another bizarre and surprising twist in this case. Prosecutors now claim that Perry, while in jail, conspired with his father to kill Janet's parents, the people he blames for all of his troubles with the law. Prosecutors say after the job was done, Arthur would meet the killer at the Guadalajara airport, pay him off, and help him get away. Authorities say they got wind of the plan and they set up the meeting with Arthur March. It's BS, and they know it. The guy was never here. That's entrapment. They used the FBI to entrap me, says Arthur March. So in addition to the charge of murdering Janet, Perry, along with his father, faces charges of conspiracy to kill her parents. But Arthur March is taking a come-and-get-me stance. According to my lawyers here, what they do in the United States doesn't affect me here. I don't go peacefully. I don't go like Perry. There's going to be bloodshed somewhere, theirs or mine. Perry's lawyers say they will mount a vigorous defense. Their client has always proclaimed his innocence. Did you get in an argument with her that night? Did you get violent? Did you kill her, either accidentally or on purpose, and then dispose of the body? Lagatuta asked. The question is highly offensive to me. I know it's your job to ask it, and the answer is no, says March. Perry March's trial for Janet's murder is expected to start next summer. Sammy and Zeepi March are now living with the Levines in Nashville. If acquitted, March plans to fight to regain custody of his children. Arthur March remains a fugitive in Mexico. An Indiana woman and her friend have been charged with murdering the woman's husband using a poisonous mushroom. Katrina Fouts and her friend Terry Hopkins were caught when authorities found cell phone location data and a gold mine of suspicious internet searches that revealed their scheme. David Michael Fouts, a 50-year-old Salesforce employee, was discovered in a Noblesville, Indiana ditch on April 24, 2020, by a dog walker. His pockets were inside out with both wallet and cell phone missing. The Salesforce senior consultant and technology architect also had cuts on his left hand, with 3 abrasions on the right foot, suggesting that he had been dragged after his death. When the autopsy shed no light on the cause of death, Hamilton County Coroner John Shaflan sent samples of mushrooms found in his stomach to a Purdue University specialist. The toxicology report revealed that there were, in fact, several slices of a highly poisonous mushroom Liophyllum conidum in Fouts' stomach. Dr. M. Catherine Aim explained that these mushrooms contain muscarine, a well-known toxin. Muscarine can cause excessive sweating and salivating to lethal symptoms, including slowed heartbeat, respiratory distress, and coma. The symptoms of muscarine poisoning begin about 5 to 30 minutes after ingestion, and a lethal dose of muscarine could come from anywhere between 2 to 15 slices. The reason the autopsy didn't initially show the deadly toxin in the victim's system is because it has a half-life of about 8 hours, and was thus undetectable at first glance. When Hamilton County deputies informed Fouts that her husband had been found dead on April 25th, she immediately responded that her husband was a violent alcoholic and that she feared he had committed suicide. She claimed that when she got home the night before he disappeared, she went to bed on the couch and noticed her husband was gone in the morning. She then claimed that a man had recently come looking for her husband regarding an affair he supposedly had, and that this man said her husband was going to die for his actions. But police cleared these alleged suspects fairly quickly. Investigators remained suspicious of the 54-year-old wife. However, as she never reported her husband missing, nor tried to contact him after his disappearance, her internet search history ultimately revealed her culpability. Fouts reportedly not only Googled how to pass a lie detector test, but also Indiana homicide laws and crime of passion law in Indiana. Police also found a screenshot of another poisonous mushroom, known as the destroying angel or Amanita virosa. The image was captioned, that is, was among the deadliest plants known to mankind. Police also found a slew of incriminating text messages. At around 8:30 a.m. on the morning after her husband was killed, Fouts texted her friend Terry Hopkins and told him, "Thank you for topping off my car fluids last night and taking care of some other things I needed help with." Fouts' friend Hopkins is a retired Richmond police officer and has been a lifelong friend of hers. He reportedly cared for Fouts' ailing father, during which time she nicknamed him Pops. In turn, Hopkins called her MKFAM, an endearing acronym for my kid from another mother. Hopkins made numerous purchases at the Harbor Freight Tools store in the days following the victim's disappearance, including microfiber cleaning clothes, 6-inch diagonal cutters, duct tape, utility knives, box cutters, cleaning gloves, 2 blue tarps, a 500-pound hydraulic lift, white zip ties, and a 6,400-pound lifting sling. Hopkins divided these purchases between 2 different stores to avoid suspicion, but, of course, to no avail. While Fouts and Hopkins have since been charged with murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and failure to report human remains, authorities can only speculate as to their motive. David Fouts was reportedly charged with domestic battery last September. He violated the subsequent no-contact order a few days later, with his court hearing postponed, when he explained that he was in a treatment facility for alcoholism in another state. Both Fouts and Hopkins were being held without bond in the Hamilton County Jail. Then Hamilton County Judge William Hughes sentenced Katrina Fouts to 34 years imprisonment for conspiracy to commit murder and another year in county jail for failure to report human remains in the killing of David Michael Fouts in April 2022. The sentences will be served simultaneously. Terry Hopkins, 64, was also charged in connection with David Fouts' death. He died in February 2022 before going to trial. The Richmond man faced similar charges of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and failure to report human remains. On February 24, 1986, 29-year-old Sherri Rasmussen was found dead in her apartment in Van Nuys, California. In a fit of jealous rage, an LAPD officer named Stephanie Lazarus had murdered Rasmussen after her on-again, off-again boyfriend John Ruetten ended their relationship for good and married Rasmussen. Furthermore, the initial investigation of Rasmussen's death is now believed to have been purposely botched by the Los Angeles Police Department to protect Lazarus, one of their own. This is the twisted story behind the murder of Sherri Rasmussen. John Ruetten and Stephanie Lazarus were both students at the University of California, Los Angeles, when they met and were both set to graduate in 1982. Ruetten was a mechanical engineering major, and Lazarus was studying political science. They were also both active and very athletic. Ruetten and Lazarus began a casual relationship, but were not intimate with each other until after graduation. Ruetten took a job as a hardware developer, and Lazarus became a police officer with the LAPD. Though they hooked up a number of times, they never made their relationship official. Later, Ruetten met Sherri Rasmussen, who was quickly rising within the medical field. She was already the director of nursing at Glendale Adventist Medical Center. Rasmussen and Ruetten bonded quickly, and soon moved into an apartment together in Van Nuys. Stephanie Lazarus, meanwhile, had a hard time letting go of Ruetten, and made herself something of a third wheel in their relationship, a situation that made Rasmussen uncomfortable. At the 25th birthday party Lazarus threw for Ruetten, he told her about Rasmussen, confessing that they were seriously involved. Lazarus, despondent, wrote a letter to Ruetten's mother in 1985. "I'm truly in love with John, and the past year has really torn me up," she wrote. "I wish it didn't end the way it did, and I don't think I'll ever understand his decision." Ruetten later testified that before he and Rasmussen got married, he and Lazarus had sex one final time so Lazarus could have closure on the relationship. Instead, Lazarus began hanging around even more. Her constant contact with Ruetten worried Sherri Rasmussen, but Ruetten assured her there was nothing more than friendship between them. However, Lazarus' infatuation grew stronger, and at one point she even came to Rasmussen's office to tell her, "If I can't have John, no one else will," though she still worried that Lazarus was stalking her. Rasmussen leaned into Ruetten's assurances, and the pair got married in November of 1985. They had 3 months of marital bliss before tragedy struck. On February 24, 1986, Rasmussen was debating going to work. She had an unexciting class on her schedule and decided to call out sick, using a recent back injury as an excuse. Ruetten left for work soon after. A few hours later, Ruetten called the house. When his call went unanswered, he tried Rasmussen's work, assuming she had decided to go in, but he couldn't reach her there either. He called the house a few more times to no avail. Ruetten tried to ignore his worries and continued his day. But when he got home from work, he found a nightmarish scene. He found the answering machine unactivated even though they activated it every day. He found a bloody handprint next to the panic button near the alarm, and the room was covered in broken objects. John Ruetten then found Sherri Rasmussen dead in the living room. She had been shot 3 times. A Los Angeles PD forensic specialist also found a bite mark on her arm and took a swab. The LAPD quickly ruled Rasmussen was a victim of a burglary. Though neighbors heard screaming and fighting, they did not call the police. Police surmised that the burglar was in the process of carrying out electronics when Rasmussen came upon them and the fight ensued. The police recovered Rasmussen's missing car, and the only other stolen item was the couple's marriage license. Ruetten was ruled out as a suspect and moved from Los Angeles after the murder. Rasmussen's father mentioned his daughter's issues with Lazarus to police, and a note was made, but the lead was never followed up on. Though the bite mark proved to be unusual, the case went cold as no suspect was ever identified. LAPD was too overwhelmed with the growing crack epidemic and related gang violence to dedicate the time needed for the investigation. But Rasmussen's father never believed that his daughter would not have been able to defend herself against a random burglar. Rasmussen's father tried for several years to have the case reopened. Later, detectives refused to do it, and it was not until DNA testing became available that the case gained new traction. A dedicated team at the LAPD worked old forensic cases, using the new technology, and Rasmussen's case was eligible. In 2004, criminalist Jennifer Francis found missing evidence from the file, the cotton swab with DNA on it. The saliva and bite mark were deemed to be female, proving the initial theory of a male burglar was not possible. But no detective took the case, so it again went cold. In 2009, the LAPD reopened the case. It was ruled a murder, with the burglary staged to throw police off the trail. Detectives eventually found Stephanie Lazarus' name in the notes from the original investigation and decided to pursue the lead. They collected DNA from a coffee cup Lazarus threw away while off duty and were able to match it to the sample taken from the bite mark. The evidence proved that Stephanie Lazarus was Rasmussen's killer, and she was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 27 years to life at the California Institution for Women. She has attempted to appeal her case several times, but the lower courts have upheld the conviction. A state parole board panel in November 2023 recommended parole for Stephanie Lazarus, who was convicted of gunning down her ex-lover's new wife in 1986 at the condominium where the couple lived in Van Nuys. The decision was made during the first parole suitability hearing for Stephanie Lazarus, and Rasmussen's relatives are outraged that the woman who hid the truth about the murder and continued to work as a law enforcement officer for more than 20 years could go free. The grant of parole is tentative and subject to review by the state's Board of Parole Hearings in a process that can take up to 120 days, according to the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Governor Gavin Newsom could then allow the decision to stand, reverse the parole grant, or ask the full parole board to consider the issue. Connie Rasmussen, Sherri Rasmussen's older sister, said in her family's first interview about the decision that while Lazarus acknowledged killing Sherri during the hearing, she did not apologize to relatives and appeared to downplay the seriousness of the crime, saying that she hadn't intended to kill Sherri when she went to the Van Nuys condo on February 24, 1986. Mother's Day, May 12, 1985, started out like any other day, especially for America's military service members, many of whom were far from their homes and families. Phone calls and cards would have to substitute for visits and hugs while they went about their duties. Gradually, however, these dedicated men and women would learn that a horrifying tragedy had befallen one of their own. The wife and 2 daughters of Captain Gary Eastburn were found murdered after fighting for their lives. Grown men shed tears at the image of the lone survivor, a 21-month-old baby, standing, arms outstretched, crying out for her dead mother and sisters, crying out for someone. Katie Eastburn was used to going it alone. She was a military wife, after all. Her husband, Gary Eastburn, was frequently away this time. He was attending an Air Force captain in training school in Alabama. The Eastburns were excited about their upcoming transfer to Germany, even if it was a little nerve-wracking thinking about moving to a foreign country. But there was sure to be plenty of support. The military base to which they had been assigned was large and accommodating to its American service members and their families. Katie and the girls knew they'd miss their family and friends, but they were also heartbroken about having to leave their family dog Dixie behind. Strict regulations prohibited them from bringing the pet along. With a heavy heart, Katie placed a classified ad in the local paper that serviced the Fayetteville and Fort Bragg area, hoping to find a good family willing to take Dixie and love the animal just as they did. Around 9 p.m. on Tuesday, May 7, 1985, Army Staff Sergeant Timothy Hennis answered the classified ad. He and his wife, Angela Hennis, loved dogs, but their current pet was extremely jealous of their newborn daughter. Despite their best efforts, Snowball, a mixed breed, just wasn't going to work out. But they hoped they could find another dog, preferably one from a home with kids, which newborn Christina could grow with and enjoy. Dixie seemed to be exactly what Tim and Angela were hoping for. Before he left the Eastburn home, he asked Katie to use the restroom, and she obliged. no doubt comfortable with her husband's fellow soldier. Tim soon exited, thanked Mrs. Eastburn for both the use of facilities and Dixie, attached the dog to a leash, and started toward home, eager to introduce Christina and Dixie. It can't be said with 100% certainty how it all went down on that Thursday, May 9th, 1985. But what is known is that Katie Eastburn and 2 of her 3 daughters would die brutal deaths. On Sunday, May 12th, the Eastburns' next-door neighbor, Army Sergeant Bob Seafault, had just bailed out one of his soldiers who had a little too much fun on Saturday night and landed himself in the clinker. When he returned home, he was greeted by a worried wife who had noticed that papers were piling up on the Eastburns' doorstep. The family car was still in the driveway, and the baby stroller was parked in its usual place by the back door. The more Bob thought about it, he realized he hadn't seen the Eastburns in at least 3 days. He decided a little investigating was in order. As he stepped up to the front door, he was certain he heard the cries of an infant. But his knocks and doorbell rings went unanswered. Returning home, he called the Eastburns' babysitter, Julie Zerniak, who came rushing over. Bob was waiting outside the Eastburn home when she arrived. Julie peeked into a window and saw baby Jana standing alone in her crib, arms outstretched. Reacting on instinct, Julie began looking for a possible way into the home. But Bob convinced her to wait for the arrival of police. Officer William Toman was the first to arrive. Forcing open a window, he retrieved the crying infant and a stack of diapers and handed her to Bob. Saying he smelled something horrible, he told Bob to stand by as he went to check out the source. Right away, he discovered the dead bodies of Katie and her 3-year-old daughter, Erin. Officer Toman called for backup. A full-scale search of the home found the body of 5-year-old Cara Eastburn, lying in bed with the covers pulled up. Area residents wanted to know, why would anyone kill a beautiful young mother and her 2 daughters? And the bigger question was, who could do such a thing? While investigators searched the home at 367 Summerhill Road for viable clues to identify the killer, a young man named Patrick Cohn reported that he had seen a man leaving the residence 3 nights ago, the night of the murders. Eager to solve the triple homicide, investigators listened intently as Patrick gave his account. I was walking home from my girlfriend's house about 3:30 a.m. as I was walking. I saw a white Chevette parked on the road. Then I saw this white dude walking down the lady's driveway. I passed right by him. He said, "I'm getting an early start this morning," or something like that. Then I watched him get in his white Chevette and drive off. Patrick then went on to provide a thorough description of the man, describing him as approximately 6'4" with blonde hair that peeked out from underneath a black toboggan knit hat, wearing a black members-only jacket atop a white shirt and blue jeans. 3 days after the murders, the police publicly broadcast via television and radio a request for the man who had answered the Eastburns classified ad about the dog to please contact police. The plea was accompanied by a composite sketch created from Patrick Cohn's description. Timothy Hennis was watching the evening news when the investigators' request was reported, and was shaken by the similarities between himself and the composite sketch. Taking his wife and baby girl, Hennis drove to the police department in his white Chevette and offered to assist in any way possible. He willingly answered all of their questions, without the aid of an attorney, and never requested one. It didn't escape police how closely Tim Hennis resembled the sketch, or that he also drove a white Chevette. Although DNA was still a few years away from being used in criminal investigations, police requested hair, blood, and semen samples from Tim, the latter because Katie Eastburn had been raped shortly before her death. Tim willingly obliged, again without the advice of an attorney. Tim and Angela returned to their home, believing they had done all they could do to hopefully bring justice for the Eastman family. So they were shocked when investigators knocked on their door later that evening, with an arrest warrant for Tim. No one involved, not police, Gary, or Janet Eastman, or the Hennesses knew that this case would occupy courtrooms for the next quarter of a century. Timothy Hennes immediately hired the high-profile Fayetteville law firm of Beaver, Holt, Richardson, Sternlicht, Burge, and Glazier. Two of their senior partners, Gary Beaver and Billy Richardson, were considered to be the best criminal defense attorneys in the state of North Carolina. Right out of the starting gate, the firm employed the services of a private investigator, Bob Neligar. His job was to retrace the steps of police detectives, scrutinize the evidence, and look for information or clues police may have missed. Julie, the family's babysitter, was the first to be interviewed. She told Neligar the family residence had recently been the target of harassing phone calls, some of a sexual nature. She admitted to her fascination with Dr. Jeffrey McDonald's case, her belief in his innocence, and her mail exchanges with the convicted murderer. She also admitted to two other important facts. Her stepbrothers strongly resembled Tim Hennes, producing photos when the investigator was skeptical, and that she had been assisting vice squads in setting up busts of local drug dealers. She believed that on one occasion she had been followed from the Eastburn home by an angry drug dealer, although she could not positively identify the man. Secondly, Neligar and the attorneys set up a reenactment of the scene described by Patrick Cohn. Along with a Tim Hennes lookalike, they went to the Summerhill Road residence at the same early morning hour, with the same foggy and moonless settings, with video camera in hand. The Patrick stand-in was unable to see the Tim actor, as the area was poorly lit during the pre-dawn hours. During the reenactment, David Hill, a neighbor from across the street, approached the team and told them that, on the night of the murder, he had approached a van parked in front of the Eastburn residence. He had spoken to a white male sporting a crew cut who said he had stopped to talk with a couple of friends whose voices David could hear in the back of the van. A couple of days later, David saw the same van for sale in the Winn-Dixie parking lot. At a second reenactment that failed to prove the eyewitness testimony, Patrick, who was present at the request of investigators, admitted that he believed he was mistaken and that he had been having doubts about having fingered Tim Hennes for quite a while. Nigeler also spotted several flaws in the evidence, such as hairs and fingerprints found at the scene that could not be matched to Hennes or any known friend or family member of the Eastburn family. And the size 9 shoe print uncovered by police was entirely too small to match Tim's size, 13 feet. World-renowned forensic expert Paul Stombaugh visited the Eastburn residence 6 months after the crime. There he located a condom package undiscovered by police underneath the dresser. According to Stombaugh, when compared to known facts about the relationship between Mr. and Mrs. Eastburn, this suggested consensual sex had occurred in the home prior to murders, as it was his experience that rapists rarely carried condoms to commit their violent acts. Additionally, after spending several hours in the home and poring over reports and evidence, Stombaugh was of the mind that the murders were committed by 2 assailants. Neligar wrapped up his investigation by speaking with Charlotte Kirby, the newspaper carrier for the Eastburn route. Charlotte was angry at being questioned and refused to provide any information other than it was raining that morning, and she had had to bag the papers. Charlotte agreed to testify, but only if she could do so anonymously. He also spoke with Lucille Cook, who had used her ATM card at the same time and same place as Katie's card had been used. She said she saw no one during her transaction. Lastly, Neligar spoke with Summerhill Road residents, Chuck and Sherri Rasmussen, who claimed to have gone out for an early morning walk at the same time Patrick Cohn said he had seen the man in the white Chevette. According to them, they not only did not see Patrick, but they hadn't seen anyone out at the hour. However, they said that a few nights later, they had indeed witnessed a blonde man with a crew cut, wearing a black beret and black members-only jacket, carrying a black garbage bag over his shoulder, walking down the street at the same time the Eastburn murders would have occurred a few nights before. Police and prosecutors, however, adamantly stuck to their belief in Tim's guilt. They badgered Patrick Cohn about his retracted identification of Tim Hennis, and prosecutor William Van Story argued that just because hair and fingerprint samples didn't match Tim didn't mean he couldn't have committed the crimes. On July 4th, 1986, after 12 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on 1 count of first-degree rape and 3 counts of first-degree murder. Tim Hennis was sentenced to death 3 times. Just days after being booked into Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, Tim Hennis received a postcard from a mysterious Mr. X that read, "Dear Mr. Hennis, I did the crime. I murdered the Eastburns. Sorry you're doing the time. I'll be safely out of North Carolina when you read this. Thanks, Mr. X." His attorneys dismissed it as a hoax, but kept the postcard on file nonetheless. The prosecution received an almost identical postcard but continued to downplay it, even when specifically requested in discovery motions. Tim's tireless attorneys continued to spend hours preparing and arguing his appeals. After more than 2 years of being on death row, Tim's conviction was overturned and sent back to the courts for a retrial, which began on February 27, 1989. This time, the prosecutor introduced a new witness, Elisa Peabody, a neighbor who had previously stated she saw no one on the night of the murders, but was now adamant that she had in fact seen Tim Hennis leave the scene of the crime. It was of little consequence to the defense, who had come to court this time with both guns blazing. They aggressively took on prosecutor witnesses such as Lucille Cook, the ATM lady who first said no one was at the machine at the time she used it, then later was firm in her memory of Tim Hennis being the person to use it before her. When she testified at the second trial that she remembered Hennis waiting a minute or two before leaving the ATM area, defense attorney used courtroom theatrics to demonstrate the length of a minute or two along with bank record timestamps to prove Lucille was lying. The state's star witness, Patrick Cohn, wasn't exempt from scrutiny when he was forced to admit he had been charged with theft, using a stolen ATM card, but had questionably been able to avoid being brought to trial. Cian Buckner, Patrick's friend, testified to having lost a wallet containing a letter written by his friend in which he admitted he didn't know who or what he really saw on the night of May 9, 1985. But the defense saved their best for last. With the help of a new private investigator, TV O'Malley, the attorneys were able to locate the mysterious walker seen by Chuck and Sherri Rasmussen, and later by newspaper carrier Charlotte Kirby. Jaws dropped when John Raupash entered the courtroom after being called to the stand. John could have been Tim's identical twin brother. Jurors and spectators were stunned when John testified that he was 6'4", always wore a black members-only jacket, black toboggan, white t-shirt, and dark corduroy pants, and that he always carried his book bag over his shoulder. Following the presentation made by the defense, especially the appearance of John Raupash, it came as no surprise when Tim Hennis was acquitted on all counts. If Tim Hennis felt free after his acquittal in 1989, this was premature. In 2007, Army officials reopened the case after experts claimed they had linked DNA from the 22-year-old murder to Tim. By this time, 49-year-old Tim had retired from the military, but was forcefully reactivated to stand trial under military jurisdiction. Double jeopardy prevented state officials from retrying Tim. Even with the discovery of new evidence, the federal government is considered a sovereign authority unto itself and therefore separate from powers of the states. Although Tim initially stuck to his story of only visiting the Eastburns to claim the dog listed in the classifieds, he later claimed that he and Katie had consensual sex the night of the murder. He did not disclose this important fact before, because, according to Tim, he was afraid and did not wish to add to Gary and Jana Eastburn's grief. The military jury rejected Tim's claims and on April 9, 2010, found him guilty on 3 counts of premeditated murder. Tim Hennis is currently on death row in an Army facility in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. His attorneys are presently working on his appeals, which are expected to go on for years. In 2020, the United States Court of Military Appeals ruled to uphold the conviction and death sentence of Timothy Hennis. That same year, Hennis attorneys filed a writ for certiorari with the U.S. Supreme Court, but it was denied in January 2021. Even after the appeals process is over, Hennis cannot be executed without presidential approval. In recent years, that hasn't happened very often. The U.S. military has not executed anyone from its ranks since 1961. On June 28, 2014, Erin Corwin disappeared from her home near Joshua Tree National Park in California. Right up until that fateful day, her life seemed happy, at least from the outside. The 19-year-old Corwin was newly pregnant and had recently married her high school sweetheart, John Corwin, a decorated Marine. But beneath the surface of the expectant mother's seemingly idyllic life was a secret, one that would prove deadly in the end. The baby she was carrying didn't belong to her husband, but instead to her longtime secret lover, Christopher Brandon Lee. And after she vanished, and her body was found at the bottom of a mine shaft a week later, it was Lee who would ultimately confess to her murder. This is the tragic true story of Erin Corwin, the young woman whose secret affair cost her her life. Born Erin Hevelin in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Erin Corwin lived a stereotypically all-American life. She met her future husband, John Corwin, when she was still in high school. They began dating when Erin was just 16 years old, and in proper fashion, John even asked permission from Erin's parents before officially dating her. In November 2012, the pair were married. Less than a year later, in September 2013, John and Erin Corwin lighted out to the Marine base in 29 Palms, California, best known as the home of Joshua Tree National Park. There, the couple quickly became friends with other military couples, including Connor and Aisling Malachi, and Christopher Brandon Lee and his wife Nicole. And it didn't take long for the three pairs of couples to become friends. While their husbands were on duty, Erin, Aisling, and Nicole would stop by each other's apartments for snacks and gossip, wrote Shanna Hogan in her book, Secrets of a Marine's Wife. When John, Connor, and Chris were home, the couples barbecued on the grill outside their complex, or watched movies and TV shows at each other's apartments. Despite this seemingly idyllic rhythm, it didn't take long for things to go horribly wrong for everyone involved. Like many newlywed couples, John and Erin Corwin frequently argued over money. They would often accuse the other of overspending, and their disagreements would often end in screaming matches. But when Erin got pregnant for the first time, the fighting seemed to stop until she miscarried shortly after discovering she was pregnant. With John unable to console his clearly devastated wife, the Corwins began to drift further apart. The Lees, too, were going through trials and tribulations of their own. While Christopher Brandon Lee, on the surface, seemed to be a perfect candidate for the Marine Corps, the reality was much different. At least once, he was reprimanded by a commanding officer for using the rifles and rocket launchers like they were toys. Over time, Chris gained a reputation for being rash and reckless, wrote Hogan. Erin Corwin and Christopher Lee began spending more time together, away from the rest of the group, and away from the watchful eyes of their respective spouses. Before long, the pair were having an affair, and Erin turned up pregnant again. But this time, the baby belonged to her lover, not her husband. On the last day anyone would see her alive, John Corwin recalled the brief but loving conversation he had with his wife. He said, "She had woken up and gotten dressed and gave me a kiss goodbye. She said, 'Hey, I'm heading out for the day and I love you.' I told her, 'I love you too,' and I rolled back over and went to sleep." On June 28, 2014, Erin Corwin disappeared, never to be seen alive again. Shortly thereafter, Christopher Brandon Lee took his wife and daughter to Alaska, where they presumably wanted to live for the rest of their lives. Initially, Erin's mother believed her daughter may have just gotten lost in the vastness of the Joshua Tree National Park, but quickly disabused herself of the notion when Erin's abandoned car was found outside the park a week later. It took 2 months for Erin's body to be recovered, which would ultimately prove to be down an abandoned mine shaft, strangled to death with a handmade garrote. Though Erin Corwin told her friends and family she was pregnant, and that Lee was the father, her body was so badly decomposed that the medical examiner could not confirm her pregnancy. Shortly after her body was found, Christopher Brandon Lee was arrested in Alaska in August 2014. While he initially pleaded not guilty to the crime, he eventually confessed to killing his former lover in August 2016, but insisted that it was because she was molesting his daughter, a claim that has never been substantiated. "I made the decision to kill her," he said. "I was controlled by the anger. The hate I felt that day, it was something I never want to experience again." In November 2016, Christopher Brandon Lee was found guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Erin Corwin. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lee appealed his case in 2018, but the California Supreme Court denied it outright, citing Lee's false claim of molestation as their reasoning. He remains behind bars to this day. For most people, September 13, 1978 was an ordinary Wednesday. But for Cheryl Bradshaw, the bachelorette on the TV matchmaking show The Dating Game, that day was momentous. From a lineup of eligible bachelors, she chose handsome bachelor number 1, Rodney Alcala, aka the dating game killer. But at that very moment, he was keeping a deadly secret. He was an unrepentant serial killer. If not for a healthy jolt of women's intuition, Bradshaw would almost certainly be remembered today as one of Alcala's victims. Instead, after the show ended, she conversed with Alcala backstage. He offered her a date she'd never forget, but Bradshaw got the feeling that her handsome potential suitor was a little off. "I started to feel ill," Bradshaw told the Sydney Telegraph in 2012. "He was acting really creepy. I turned down his offer. I didn't want to see him again." Another one of the episode's bachelors, actor Jed Mills, recalled to LA Weekly that Rodney was kind of quiet. "I remember him because I told my brother about this one guy who was kind of good-looking, but kind of creepy. He was always looking down and not making eye contact." Had the popular dating show performed background checks on their bachelors, they would have discovered that this kind of good-looking but kind of creepy guy had already spent 3 years in prison for raping and beating an 8-year-old girl. He'd done the same to a 13-year-old too, which landed him on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. But sometimes a background check can't even uncover the whole story. In Rodney Alcala's case, the whole story consisted of at least 4 prior murders that he hadn't been definitively linked to yet. As you can probably imagine, Cheryl Bradshaw's rejection likely only fueled Alcala's fire. In total, before and after his television appearance, the sadistic dating game killer claimed that he killed between 50 and 100 people. Rodney Alcala was born in San Antonio, Texas in 1943. His father moved the family to Mexico when Alcala was 8 years old, only to abandon them there 3 years later. His mother then moved Alcala and his sister to suburban Los Angeles. At age 17, Alcala entered the army as a clerk, but after a nervous breakdown, he was medically discharged due to mental health issues. Then, the intelligent young man with an IQ of 135 went on to attend UCLA. But he wouldn't stay on the straight and narrow for long. Like many serial killers, Rodney Alcala had a style. His signatures were beating, biting, raping, and strangling, often choking victims until the point of unconsciousness. Then once they came to, he'd start the process over again, On his first known attempt at killing, he was successful at only 2 of these things. The victim was Tali Shapiro, an 8-year-old girl he lured into his Hollywood apartment in 1968. Shapiro barely survived her rape and beating, her life saved by a passerby who'd reported a tip to police on a possible abduction. Alcala fled his apartment when the police arrived and remained a fugitive for years afterward. He moved to New York and used the alias John Berger to enroll in film school at New York University, where, ironically enough, he studied under Roman Polanski. After being recognized thanks to an FBI poster, Alcala was finally identified as the perpetrator in the rape and attempted murder of Tali Shapiro. He was arrested in 1971, but only sent to prison on charges of assault. Shapiro's family kept her from testifying, making a rape conviction unattainable. After spending 3 years behind bars, he soon spent another 2 years in prison for assaulting a 13-year-old girl. Then, authorities regrettably let Alcala travel to New York to visit relatives. Investigators now believe that within 7 days of his arrival there, he killed a college student named Elaine Hover, who was the daughter of a popular Hollywood nightclub owner and goddaughter of both Sammy Davis Jr. and Dean Martin. Soon after all of this, Alcala somehow got a job at the Los Angeles Times as a typesetter in 1978, under his real name, which was now attached to a substantial criminal record. A typist by day, by night he lured in young girls to be part of his professional photography portfolio, some of them never to be heard from again. Now go back and listen to Alcala tell Bachelorette Bradshaw the best time is at night. Absolutely chilling stuff. The year after the dating game appearance, 17-year-old Leanne Leadham was lucky enough to walk away unscathed from a photo shoot with Rodney Alcala, and she remarked how he showed her his portfolio, which in addition to shots of women included spread after spread of naked teenage boys. Police have since released parts of Alcala's portfolio to the public to aid in victim identification. Over the years, a few have stepped forward to reveal their horrifying moment with this predator. The case that would finally break Rodney Alcala's killing spree was that of 12-year-old Robin Samsoe. She disappeared from Huntington Beach, California on her way to ballet class on June 20th, 1979. Samsoe's friends said that a stranger approached them on the beach and asked if they'd want to do a photo shoot. They declined and Samsoe left, borrowing a friend's bike to hurriedly get to ballet. At some point between the beach and class, Samsoe disappeared. Nearly 12 days later, a park ranger found her animal-ravaged bones in a forested area near the Pasadena foothills of the Sierra Madre. Upon questioning Samsoe's friends, a police sketch artist drew up a composite, and Alcala's former parole officer recognized the face. Between the sketch, Alcala's criminal past, and the discovery of Samsoe's earrings in Alcala's Seattle storage locker, police felt confident that they had their man. But beginning with the trial in 1980, Samsoe's family would have to follow a rather long and winding road to justice. The jury found Alcala guilty of first-degree murder, and he received the death penalty. However, the California Supreme Court overturned this verdict due to the jury being prejudiced, they felt, by learning of Alcala's past sex crimes. It took 6 years to put him back on trial. At the second trial in 1986, another jury sentenced him to death. This one didn't stick either. A Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals panel overturned it in 2001. LA Weekly wrote, in part because the second trial judge did not allow a witness to back up the defense's claim that the park ranger who found Robin Samsoe's animal-ravaged body in the mountains had been hypnotized by police investigators. Finally, in 2010, 31 years after the murder, a third trial was held. Just before the trial, Orange County's senior deputy district attorney, Matt Murphy, stated, "The 70s in California was insane as far as treatment of sexual predators. Rodney Alcala is a poster boy for this. It is a total comedy of outrageous stupidity." During the years he spent incarcerated, Alcala self-published a book called You, the Jury, in which he proclaimed his innocence in the Samsoe case. He hotly contested the DNA swabs done on prisoners periodically for the police department's evidence bank. Alcala also brought 2 lawsuits against the California penal system, one for a slip and fall accident, and another for the prison's refusal to provide him with a low-fat menu. Alcala announced, to much surprise, that he would be his own lawyer in his 3rd trial. Even though now, 31 years after Samsoe's murder, investigators also had concrete evidence against him on 4 different murders from decades past, thanks to the prison's DNA swabs. The prosecution was able to combine these new murder charges along with Robin Samsoe in the 2010 trial. During the 2010 trial, the jurors were in for a bizarre ride. Rodney Alcala, acting as his own attorney, asked himself questions, referring to himself as Mr. Alcala in a deep voice, which he would then answer. The peculiar question and answer session continued for 5 hours. He told the jury that he was at Knott's Berry Farm at the time of Samsoe's murder, played dumb on the other charges, and used an Arlo Guthrie song as part of his closing argument. Rodney Alcala simply stated that he didn't remember killing the other women. The only other witness for the defense, psychologist Richard Rappaport, offered the explanation that Alcala's memory lapse could be equated to his borderline personality disorder. The jury, not surprisingly, found Alcala guilty of the 4 DNA-backed charges and also found him guilty of killing Samsoe. A surprise witness at his sentencing was Tali Shapiro, the girl that Alcala had raped and beaten within an inch of her life about 40 years before. Shapiro was there to witness as justice for Robin Samsoe, 12, Jill Barcombe, 18, Georgia Wickstead, 27, Charlotte Lamb, 31, and Jill Parenteau, 21, had finally been achieved. The court handed Alcala the death penalty again for the 3rd time. Since that trial, investigators have continued to link the dating game killer to many other cold case murders, including 2 to which he pled guilty in New York in 2013. The full extent of his crimes may never be known. While still sitting on death row in California, Rodney Alcala died of natural causes at age 77 on July 24, 2021. Immediately, some of his victims spoke up, expressing their relief that the dating game killer was finally truly gone. "The planet is a better place without him, that's for sure," said Tali Shapiro. "It's a long time coming, but he's got his karma." Investigator Jeff Sheeman, who had been working on a cold case involving Alcala in Wyoming in recent years, was even more blunt, saying, "He's where he needs to be, and I'm sure that's in hell." Sheeman recalled that, during interviews with police, Alcala would trace his finger along the faces of his victims in the photographs put before him, perhaps in hopes that it would irritate and even enrage the detectives. Throughout his investigation, Sheeman was overcome with just how cold Alcala was, and ultimately came to believe that he may have taken untold scores of victims that we'll never know about. Sheeman said after Alcala's death, "Hell, there might be a ton of other victims out there." When Kelly Cochran's husband found out about her affair, he asked her a simple question that had unimaginably gruesome consequences. How would she make up for it? Jason Cochran was satisfied with the answer. He would forgive his wife of 13 years if she lured her lover to their house with the promise of sex, and then allowed her jealous husband to blow the lover's brains out. Kelly Cochran's co-worker and fling, Christopher Regan, was fatally caught off guard. He was mid-coitus when Jason Cochran emerged from the shadows to execute him at point-blank range with a .22 rifle. Moments later, Kelly Cochran was handing her husband a buzzsaw with which to dismember him. Little did Jason know that he would be next. Kelly grew resentful of the 2014 incident and later killed him with a heroin overdose to even the score in 2016. When holes in her story led to her arrest, she claimed Regan's murder was born out of a lethal marital pact. This is the grisly story of Kelly Cochran. Born and raised in Merrillville, Indiana, Kelly and Jason Cochran were high school sweethearts who grew up next door to each other. They were so enamored with each other that they were married after Kelly Cochran graduated from high school in 2002 and made a lifelong promise to kill anyone who they might cheat with. Jason Cochran worked hard servicing swimming pools until his back gave out after 10 years of physical labor. While his wife tried to pay the bills, the debts kept piling up. The couple left Indiana for Caspian, Michigan, in 2013, also looking forward to legal marijuana, which would help ease Jason's chronic pain. Kelly Cochran met Christopher Regan at a factory job manufacturing naval ship parts. An Air Force veteran and Detroit native, he and Cochran bonded and became lovers despite their 20-year age difference. Through his relationship with Cochran, Regan was also cheating on his girlfriend, Terry O'Donnell. They finally agreed to patch things up the day that he died. On October 14, 2014, Chris Regan planned to spend the night with Kelly Cochran, unaware she had spent the previous night arguing with her husband about him. Knowing it meant her lover's death, Cochran invited him over and had sex with him as her husband shot him in the head. Neighbors heard a shot, then power tools. O'Donnell reported Regan missing 10 days later, but the Cochrans had already dumped his remains in the woods. While they parked his car on the outskirts of town, they failed to notice a post-it note with directions to their house inside. Police were more observant and found the car, the note inside, and their suspects. Police paid Jason and Kelly Cochran a visit, finding the former entirely at ease and the latter uncomfortable. They later questioned them separately. Kelly admitted to having an affair with Regan, but claimed she and her husband had an open marriage. Jason, meanwhile, appeared rather aggravated at her infidelity. While the Cochrans had managed to remove all evidence of their crimes and the case went cold, an FBI search of their home in March 2015 prompted the terrified couple to leave town for Hobart, Indiana. It was there, on February 20th, 2016, that suspicions got the better of the couple, and Cochran murdered her husband. When EMTs arrived at the Mississippi Street residence, they found Jason Cochran unresponsive, and Kelly was reportedly disruptive as they attempted to revive him. The EMTs declared Cochran's husband dead of an overdose, unaware that she had deliberately overloaded his heroin fix, then smothered him for good measure. Cochran held a memorial service days later, claiming it was the hardest thing I will ever have to deal with online, while pawning off her belongings. She fled Indiana on April 26th without notifying relatives, and when the Hobart medical examiner realized Jason died of asphyxiation, she became a fugitive. With probable cause, authorities charged her with murder, home invasion, conspiracy to commit bodies, disinterment and mutilation, concealing the death of an individual, lying to a police officer, and accessory to murder after the fact. Even though she was on the run, Cochran unwisely kept in touch with investigators via text. Her messages claimed she was hiding out on the West Coast in an attempt to throw police off course. However, they simply tracked her phone to Wingo, Kentucky, where U.S. Marshals arrested her on April 29th. Finally, Cochran pointed cops to Regan's remains and the murder weapon. Kelly Cochran's trial revealed that she contemplated killing Jason instead of Chris. She felt that he had killed the only good thing I had in my life, adding, "I still hate him." And yes, it was revenge. I evened the score. While serving a life sentence for Christopher Regan's death, she earned another 65 years in April 2018 for killing her husband. Police said she only told her spouse about Regan when he declined a serious relationship, as the diabolical pact would ensure his death. Ultimately, the full extent of Kelly Cochran's crimes only began to reveal themselves while she was in prison. Once news got out that the couple had dismembered Christopher Regan, friends and neighbors came to the stomach-churning revelation that they had very likely eaten Regan's barbecued remains at a cookout hosted by Cochran. Prosecutors also claimed that Cochran had boasted in interviews to killing several other people, and that she may well be a serial killer with up to 9 bodies buried across the Midwest. Regardless, Kelly Cochran will spend the rest of her life behind bars. Angel Maturino Resendiz hopped on and off freight trains to target victims he found close to the railroad. His attacks were distinctive for their brutal blows to victims' heads, often caused by objects found in the victims' own homes. Known as the Railroad Killer, he was at one point the FBI's most wanted fugitive. The FBI linked the Railroad Killer to at least 15 murders across several states in the 1990s, and only one woman survived to tell the tale after being beaten, raped, and left for dead. And after Angel Maturino, Resendiz escaped capture several times by being voluntarily deported back to Mexico, it would take the combined effort of an FBI task force and the Railroad Killer's own sister to finally bring him to justice in 1999. Resendiz was born on August 1, 1959, in Puebla, Mexico, as Angel Leoncio Reyes Resendiz. At age 14, he illegally entered Florida before being deported in 1976. In fact, over a 20-year period, Resendiz was deported or voluntarily returned to Mexico 17 times, having illegally entered the U.S. using a series of aliases. Convicted on at least 9 occasions for serious felonies, including burglary, Resendiz would be deported after he served his sentence, then head right back to the U.S. to resume his criminal activities. Drifting back and forth across the border, Resendiz illegally hopped freight trains while working seasonal migrant farm jobs, riding rail cars to Florida for orange picking season or up to Kentucky to harvest tobacco. In 1986, Resendiz killed his first victim, an unidentified homeless woman in Texas, according to the Houston Chronicle. But it wasn't until Resendiz killed 2 teenage runaways in 1997 near railroad tracks in Central Florida that investigators linked those slayings to his previous crimes and realized that they had a serial killer on their hands. On the night of August 29, 1997, in Lexington, Kentucky, young couple Christopher Meyer and Holly Dunn were walking along railway tracks back to a party near the University of Kentucky when Resendiz suddenly emerged from a crouched position behind a metal electrical box, binding the terrified couple's hands and feet and gagging Meyer. Resendiz wandered off, then came back with a large rock, which he dropped on Meyer's head. Resendiz raped Dunn, who stopped struggling when he reportedly told her just how easy it would be for him to kill her. Left viciously beaten by a large object and suffering multiple facial fractures, Dunn became the lone survivor of the Railroad Killer. Resendiz continued riding the rails and committing murders across several states, with the ferocity of his attacks increasing with each stop. His murder spree was only interrupted when he was detained by the Immigration and Naturalization Service. But once he was free, his killings continued anew. After having beaten 2 elderly women to death in their Texas and Georgia homes, Resendiz entered the Texas home of Claudia Benton late at night on December 17, 1998. Benton was soon found beaten to death with a statue in her bedroom, and Resendiz was far from finished. On May 2, 1999, he entered the Weimar, Texas, home of a pastor and his wife. In their house, situated behind the church and near the railroad tracks, Resendiz beat Norman and Karen Cernick to death with a sledgehammer as they slept, then sexually assaulted Karen. The search for Resendiz received widespread national media attention, even appearing on an episode of America's Most Wanted. The FBI saw similarities between the Benton and Cernick murder scenes, and DNA obtained from both came back as a match. The connected crime scenes were entered into VICAP, the nationwide data information center that collects and analyzes information on violent crimes. The Kentucky murder of Christopher Meyer, which Holly Dunn miraculously survived, seemed to match aspects of the murders of Benton and the Cernics, and the DNA once again matched as well. The FBI then obtained a federal warrant for Resendiz's arrest in late May 1999 and formed a multi-agency task force to apprehend him. Over an 18-month period, the Immigration and Naturalization Service detained the railroad killer 9 times, but, hiding behind fabricated identities, he was voluntarily returned to Mexico on each occasion. But the Immigration and Naturalization Service's gravest error came on the night of June 1st, 1999, according to Justice Department documents, when the railroad killer was detained entering the U.S. in the desert near the Santa Teresa border crossing in New Mexico. Resendiz provided an unused alias and a different date of birth, and with authorities unaware, there was a warrant for his arrest in connection with several murders. Resendiz was voluntarily returned to Mexico the following day. 2 days later, the railroad killer re-entered Texas and savagely committed 4 more murders over the course of just 12 days. On June 4th, the railroad killer killed 2 people in 1 day, sexually assaulting Houston schoolteacher Noemi Dominguez before murdering her with a pickaxe. In her stolen car, Resendiz traveled to Schulenburg, Texas, around 4 miles from Weimar, and the previous Cernic killings. In Schulenburg, he used that same pickaxe to kill 73-year-old Josephine Konvicka, leaving the weapon embedded in Konvicka's head. Moving north, Resendiz next invaded the home of 80-year-old George Morber, just 100 yards from a railroad track in Gorham, Illinois. The railroad killer shot Morber in the back of the head with a shotgun before Morber's 57-year-old daughter, Carolyn Frederick, arrived. And Resendiz didn't spare Frederick, beating her to death, then sexually assaulting her afterward. As dread escalated across communities easily reachable by train, Resendiz was placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. The FBI task force was stunned to find that Angel Maturino Resendiz had been rounded up and deported 8 times in a mere 18 months. Most unbelievably, on June 2nd, 1999, when state and federal warrants were out and intensive efforts were underway to catch him. Behind the scenes, the railroad killer's sister worked with Texas Ranger Drew Carter by encouraging her brother to give himself up. She was later awarded $86,000 for aiding in his surrender. On July 13th, 1999, Resendiz, accompanied by family, surrendered on an El Paso border crossing bridge, shaking Ranger Carter's hand. The railroad killer's innocuous 5-foot, 190-pound appearance belied the monstrous acts he'd committed. Resendiz was evaluated as mentally disturbed, but not insane at trial, and on May 18, 2000, with survivor Holly Dunn having testified, was convicted for the capital murder of Claudia Benton. Having also confessed to 8 other murders, Resendiz was sentenced to death, following an automatic appeal. On the day of his execution, he asked forgiveness from the family members of his victims in attendance, and from God, for allowing the devil to deceive me, with his final words stating, "I deserve what I am getting." The railroad killer died by lethal injection on June 27, 2006. Sania Khan separated from her husband in 2022, despite pressure from her family, and was trying to start a new chapter, she said in online posts. She got her own place in Chicago, miles away from the man she described as toxic. On TikTok, she documented it all, from the pain of leaving a marriage she shouldn't have been in to begin with, to the shame she felt at the hands of her South Asian community, to the heart-wrenching process of starting her life over. She spoke openly, and thousands listened. "Women are always expected to stay silent," Khan wrote in one post. "It's what keeps us in messed up situations in the first place." But living independently and working as a photographer, she said she was finally reclaiming her autonomy. Then, she was shot to death. Rahil Ahmad made the 11-hour drive from his Alpharetta, Georgia, home to Khan's Chicago apartment, where he allegedly came to kill her. After his family found he was missing from his home, they asked for a welfare check at Khan's apartment, where they thought he might be. In the residence, Chicago police officers found a 29-year-old female and a 36-year-old male unresponsive, both with gunshot wounds to the head. The woman was pronounced dead on scene, and the man was transported to the hospital, where he later died. Coroners identified the bodies as Khan and Ahmad. They ruled her death a homicide and his a suicide. As a Pakistani American, Khan's killing sent shockwaves through the diaspora. Other South Asian women who have been through divorces say they have faced the same stigmas and isolation when trying to leave abusive partners. "I could see myself in her," said one Marathi woman who lives in the U.S. For her to have not only left him, but being able to survive and be happy and do well, that was not something he could live with. The woman, who chose to stay anonymous for safety reasons, said her ex-husband had threatened to harm her and her children. "He wouldn't have hesitated to kill me," she said. Experts say Khan's death and the posts she made leading up to it have brought to the surface overdue conversations about shaming, sexism, and patriarchy in South Asian communities. "Going through a divorce as a South Asian woman feels like you failed at life sometimes," Khan wrote in a TikTok posted in June 2022. "The way the community labels you, the lack of emotional support you receive, and the pressure to stay with someone because what will people say is isolating. It makes it harder for women to leave marriages that they shouldn't have been in to begin with." In South Asian communities, the pressure to get married and stay married goes beyond the individual. Survivors say that growing up, they were pressured to just say yes for the good of the family. "There's this stigma in our community that puts pressure on women to sacrifice," said Rakhnakar, executive director at Houston area survivor organization DEA, "to sacrifice their emotional and physical well-being for the good of others. And while we all want to be altruistic human beings, it's an undue burden on women specifically." A Punjabi woman said that when her parents first started looking to arrange her marriage, she fought as hard as she could. "The fact that a girl has the gumption to say no to a guy is completely unbelievable. Especially in my family," she stated, choosing to stay anonymous for safety as well. "Like, how dare you say no to this guy?" Eventually, when she could no longer take the guilt, she married a man who she thought was a friend. Quickly, though, the relationship turned sour. After their wedding, her husband began verbally abusing her. When she tried to fight back, it escalated to physical abuse. Lost and traumatized, she turned to her family, hoping for guidance and support in finding a way out. "I was really upset and I shared with my mother how he had hit me," she said. "She told me, 'You've just gotten married, so don't talk to me about this.' I didn't know what to do. My parents, who have been my emotional support all my life. My mom is telling me I need to stay in this marriage because she couldn't bear the shame. She wasn't trained to recognize abuse," she said, and she never thought something like that would happen to her. But her parents, friends, and entire community were telling her the same thing, that she had to stay with her husband. It wasn't until years later, after 2 kids, escalating violence, and a bout with cancer, that she finally filed for divorce. "Living in that traditional cultural setup for so long, I did not have one single person in my life who said it's absolutely the right thing to do," she said. "Everyone around me told me that as a woman, I have to be the key person in keeping the family together, that I'm being selfish." Her parents only accepted her decision when they visited her house and witnessed how acute the abuse had gotten. And after she left him, she said all her friendships dissolved overnight. She too heard about Sania Khan's death, she said, and she recognized in her all the things that she had been through. The culture around us makes the men so entitled. A woman's role revolves around a man. It wasn't just that man Sania's husband, it was her whole family. The pool of survivors' care has worked with spans South Asian communities. But there's one ideology that she said holds firm among all of them. The survivors that were working with me come from all different backgrounds, different faiths, different income levels, different education levels, she said. But one thread that ties every survivor that we have worked with together is this lingering thought of, what will people say? Reputation culture looms large, she said, and women bear the burden of fitting men's expectations, even if it's at their own expense. Family members often participate in this emotional abuse, according to CARE. But it doesn't always look the same. It can be extreme, where it comes down to if you get a divorce, you're going to lose your whole family. And then there's things that are a little more subtle. Like, are you sure that's what you want to do? Is there any other way? There are also family members who might support the divorce, but treat it like a stain on the family, keeping it a secret from friends and relatives in an effort to uphold their reputation. We don't want to break up a family, CARE said. That's fine, but now there's a woman who's dead. How is that not the ultimate breaking of a family? Patriarchal systems create South Asian men who are raised to feel more valuable than women, said Neha Gill, Executive Director at South Asian Survivors Organization Apnagar. It starts from childhood, survivors added, when girls are asked to help in the kitchen, and boys are allowed to be carefree. Gill's organization is based in Chicago, where Khan died, and she has seen the impacts ripple through a community of women who resonated with her TikToks on a very personal level. In South Asian circles, she said, there's interpersonal work to be done in bringing up men who hold themselves accountable. There shouldn't be this inherent boys are better thing, she said. South Asians celebrate when they have a son. There are these underlying notions that persist. It doesn't matter whether people have come to the U.S. When trying to leave her husband, the U.S. felt like an isolating place, the Marathi survivor said. The courts didn't help, and she lost faith in justice systems. And on top of that, her community treated her like an outsider. People around you treat you like you're crazy. All of these years, it has just been me, my son, and my daughter trying to figure out what to do. We, as a society, should say that divorce, there's nothing wrong with it. It's fine. It took all her strength to overcome generations of sexism that had been drilled into her from childhood, said the Punjabi survivor. But once she did, she realized the depth of unfairness in what is asked of South Asian women around the world. I was drowning, she said, and people didn't want to help. Early one Sunday morning in February 2019, Jassy Correia stepped out of a nightclub after a night of celebrating her 23rd birthday in Boston's Theater District and into a red sedan. 5 days later, when police stopped that same Buick on Interstate 95 in Delaware, Correia's body was inside a suitcase in the trunk. Correia, authorities determined, died from strangulation and blunt force trauma. Louis Coleman III, the Providence man behind the wheel, who authorities allege left the area outside the venue nightclub with Correia, is now charged with kidnapping, resulting in death, a federal charge carrying a mandatory life sentence in prison. Coleman's trial began Tuesday in federal court in Boston, where Assistant U.S. Attorney Eliana Newsom told the jury Correia was abducted, sexually assaulted, and killed by Coleman. Newsom said Coleman's DNA was discovered in Correia's vagina, rectum, and under her fingernails. David Hoos, Coleman's attorney, reiterated that his client is not guilty of kidnapping and told jurors they should only focus on that charge, since Coleman is not facing any others. To convict Coleman, prosecutors must only prove that Coleman kidnapped Correia, which resulted in her death, and traveled across state lines. Prosecutors, in November, determined they will not seek the death penalty against Coleman. Coleman, Hughes said, is more than a terrible series of events that took place in the early morning hours of February 24, 2019. Nobody wants to be known or remembered by the worst thing of their lives, Hughes added. Video footage released in court shows Correia fell to the ground outside the nightclub after she was pushed out of a vehicle by an Uber driver when she entered the car intended for someone else. Coleman approached Correia and took her hand, a moment that shows Coleman is not the kind of person who is going to stand by when a woman needs help on a cold night in the city of Boston. Hughes said Correia got into Coleman's car voluntarily. There clearly was a fight between Jassy and Lewis. He added that what happened in that car was not a planned event, and it was not initiated by Coleman. Here's what law enforcement officials alleged happened in February 2019. Correia, the mother of a 2-year-old daughter living in Lynn, went out to celebrate her birthday with friends on the night of Saturday, February 23rd. Then Suffolk County District Attorney Rachel Rollins told reporters. The group went to Venue, a nightclub in Boston's Theater District on Warrenton Street. In testimony during Coleman's trial, Aja Hiltz, Correia's friend, said she and Correia spent the night dancing and drinking champagne. Correia wore a new orange jumpsuit and left Venue with her 3 friends at closing time, but she became separated from the group, Newsom told jurors. In the early hours of Sunday, February 24th, Correia is seen on the sidewalk on Tremont Street near the nightclub, socializing with several people at 2:14 a.m., according to surveillance video footage reviewed by Thomas Zukauskas, an FBI special agent. Newsom said the footage also shows Correia, who appeared to be intoxicated, entering an Uber vehicle that was not intended for her. Correia was pushed out by the driver and fell to the ground. A man, later determined to be Coleman, approaches her and the pair is seen leaving the area before entering a red sedan. Zukauskas wrote in an affidavit filed in Boston federal court. Earlier that night, Coleman allegedly entered Venue and scanned his Rhode Island driver's license at the door, which showed his listed address as 95 Chestnut Street in Providence, according to the affidavit. Boston police previously said Correia, who was wearing big hoop earrings, an orange jumpsuit, and a jean jacket with an image of red lips and pink wings on the back of it, was seen entering the car near Tremont and Herald Street. It is the last known moment Correia was seen moving, according to another surveillance video reviewed by the FBI. The red sedan enters the parking lot of Coleman's apartment building in Providence, some 50 miles and an hour's drive from Venue, about 2 hours later, around 4:15 a.m. Coleman allegedly parks the car, leaves, and returns with a light-colored blanket, the affidavit says. A short time later, Coleman walked from the red sedan towards the front of the building, carrying a body with long hair and orange pants. I believe that this footage shows Coleman carrying the victim into his apartment building, Zukauskas wrote. Video footage from the building's lobby shows that, at approximately 4:27 a.m., Coleman entered the building carrying a woman's body. I am familiar with the appearance of the victim and recognize the woman as the victim. Coleman put the victim on the floor and dragged the victim to the building's elevator. The victim was naked from the waist up and was wearing orange pants. The victim was not moving, and her body was limp. At 4:29 a.m., Coleman can allegedly be seen on video dragging Correia off the elevator and toward his 6th-floor apartment. After not having seen Correia since she left Venue early Sunday morning, a friend accompanies Correia's father around 5:30 p.m. to report the 23-year-old missing to Boston police, according to Zukauskas. As the two filed their report that day, unbeknownst to them, Coleman makes a trip to Walmart, where receipts show he purchases 3 Tyvek suits, duct tape, 2 candles, electrical tape, a mask, surgical gloves, 2 pairs of safety goggles, a respirator, and bleach. He was seen driving a red Buick sedan in the store's parking lot. Authorities later learned Coleman does not have a vehicle registered to his name, but that a 2016 red Buick sedan is registered to his mother in California. Surveillance video at Coleman's apartment shows him entering with Walmart shopping bags. On Wednesday night, February 27, 2019, Boston police post a missing person alert for Correia. Included are photos of her and the man she was last seen with, as well as surveillance video. Meanwhile, a video taken at Coleman's apartment building shows him entering around 9:58 p.m. with a large dark-colored suitcase with bright blue piping, Zukowskas wrote. The suitcase appeared to be in new condition with sales tags affixed. Hours later, at 2:15 a.m., Coleman wheels the suitcase from the direction of his apartment towards the building's elevator. A few minutes later, Coleman exited the elevator and wheeled the suitcase across the parking lot and placed the suitcase into the trunk of the red sedan. Zukowskas wrote, Coleman appeared to have difficulty lifting the suitcase into the trunk. Between 2:44 and 4:02 a.m., Coleman allegedly leaves the building several times with cardboard boxes, trash bags, a bottle of bleach, a computer tower, a black laptop case, and a small duffel bag. Since she was last seen the morning of February 24th, Correia is never seen leaving Coleman's apartment, then U.S. Attorney for Massachusetts, Andrew Lelling told reporters. With a search warrant in hand, law enforcement officers collect evidence at Coleman's apartment later in the day. They find 2 respirator masks, among other items, and notice the cover to one of 4 cushions on a sofa is missing, according to Zukowskas. In a dumpster outside of the apartment complex, white trash bags, a bag containing plastic sheets, men's jeans with bleach stains and a belt, a white nylon hooded coverall, an empty box of baking soda, clear safety goggles, a respirator mask, duct tape, rubbing alcohol, Walmart bags, used plastic, gloves, an empty package from a car air freshener, 3 empty packages of purifying charcoal, and a sponge were recovered. Midday Thursday, Coleman's picture is posted by Boston police as a suspect in the kidnapping case. A broadcast describing his vehicle was put out by the state of Rhode Island, and he is later found after 2 p.m. on Interstate 95 near Wilmington, Delaware. A state police trooper ordered Coleman out of the Buick and asked him if anyone else was inside the car. Coleman stated words to the effect, "She's in the trunk." There, in the trunk, police find a large, dark-colored suitcase with blue piping, believed to be the same as the one Coleman was seen carrying the night before. He wrote, Law enforcement opened the suitcase and observed a black plastic bag inside the suitcase. Inside the black plastic bag was a light-colored sofa cushion cover. Inside the cushion cover was the body of a woman who appears to be the victim, who was deceased. The body had blood on its face and significant bruising and was bound with duct tape, the report states. A white, powdery residue, authorities believe to be baking soda, was found over the body. A duffel bag, a pair of new long-handled loppers, plastic garbage bags, clothing, a red plastic gas container, a green butane lighter, black gloves, charcoal air purifiers, air fresheners, tinted safety glasses, plastic Walmart bags, worked mouse set of dual pliers, laptop, a computer hard drive, and disinfectant wipes were also recovered in Coleman's vehicle. The statement from Lelling's office says, Photos of the sedan show the sedan's windshield is cracked in 2 places on the passenger side. It does appear that Correia put up a struggle, Lelling adding it was not clear if the damage to the window was a result of that. Lelling told reporters it appears Correia died due to blunt force trauma and strangulation. When he was arrested, Coleman had a large bandage on the right side of his face. When asked about it, Coleman told a police trooper, "It's from the girl." A jury found that he kidnapped Correia outside a Boston nightclub in February 2019. Coleman was convicted in June 2022. Louis Coleman III, 36, of Providence, Rhode Island, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the kidnapping and killing of Jassy Correia. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to stay tuned with the latest uploads.